This is Audible.
HarperCollins presents Skulduggery Pleasant, Dead or Alive, by Derek Landy. Read by Kevin Healy. In years to come, it'd be nice if COVID-19 was an easily managed affliction, or even a distant memory. But right now, as we're living through it, it's robbing us of time and loved ones. So this is to all the good times we spent with the people we love, and all the great times still to come, and the loved ones we've yet to meet. If this book has a message, it's that time heals, and love is forever, and laughter is... Hold on, no. The message, I think, is that bad times pass, and good times are always... No, that's not it either. Maybe something about punching. There's a lot of punching in this book. Some kicking too, and jokes, many jokes. Man, I'm funny. I find myself hilarious, I don't mind telling you. Absolutely. Wait, what was I talking about? Chapter 1. This was surely going to be the greatest day in the life of Rancid Finds, and it was a Tuesday. Not the most auspicious day of the week, he supposed, but he was aware of at least a few momentous things that had occurred on Tuesdays before now. The stock market crash, back in 1929, that had been on a Tuesday. The Challenger, that had exploded on a Tuesday in 1986. He'd been sad about that. He'd never particularly liked mortals, but had always admired astronauts. He liked the way they bounced on the moon. Elvis had died on a Tuesday, as had Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. D-Day. That had happened on a Tuesday, and it had ruined everything, back when he'd been working with the Nazis. It had almost soured Tuesdays for him forever. But he was about to take Tuesdays back. He was about to restore the most depressing day of the week to its former glory, if it had ever had any. He checked his watch and smiled. 4:48 in the morning would forever be known as the time the Faceless Ones returned to their rightful place as masters of the earth. He threw the switch. Very little happened. "What's wrong?" asked Kiln. "Nothing," Rancid said, hurrying over to the array and checking the connections. There were over a dozen power cables leading to and from the metal dish. Any one of them could have come loose. It was an easy fix. It would be an easy fix. It had to be an easy fix. "What are you doing?" Kiln asked. Rancid resisted the urge to shout at him, to tell him to shut up and let him work. Now was not the time to lose his temper. This was a joyous occasion. Or it would be, once it got going. Besides, Kiln was a good deal taller than him, and a good deal stronger, and a good deal scarier. Rancid Fine was tall in the mind. He was strong in the heart. He was scary in the soul. "It's a loose cable," he muttered. "It's an easy fix." It was a nice night. Summer was a month away, and the sky twinkled with stars. He was glad the Faceless Ones were going to return to good weather. He imagined that the dimension they'd been exiled to was cold and barren. He was looking forward to welcoming them back to the warmth. "What's wrong with it?" Kiln asked, coming over. Rancid got to his feet, staring at the array. The crystal of the saints, yellow, as big as both of Rancid's fists side by side, sat in its place in the centre of the dish. With the power cables connected, which they were, the crystal should have been glowing. All those sigils he'd painstakingly carved into the metal, they were supposed to be glowing too. The whole thing should have been lighting up the entire mountainside. "Nothing's wrong," Rancid said. "Then why isn't it working?" "Give it time." Kiln frowned. "How much time?" "As much as it needs." "Rancid, you said it would work immediately. You said all the adjustments you'd made to the array would mean an instant connection. You said it would light up. You said there'd be fireworks." "It just needs more..." Kiln grabbed him by the collar of his coat and pulled him in. "I've spent every last cent I have on this project.
Everything I own went into the equipment that you specified, that you designed. It will work, Rancid squealed. It will not work. It was never going to work. The array can't pull power out of the crystal of the saints because there is no power. It's a dud. No! Rancid screamed. Kiln threw him down. My whole life, he said, horrified. I bet my whole life on this. It will bring the Faceless Ones back, Rancid whimpered. I don't care about them, Kiln sneered. I don't give a damn about your gods. I was after the power you assured me was resting in that thing. With it, I could have had everything. I'd have been able to rebuild my fortune 100 times over. Rancid blinked up at him. But we were going to bring back the Faceless Ones. That was your dream, you insufferable toad. You were going to betray me? Kiln laughed. Yes, Rancid, I was going to betray you. Once you'd proven the crystal still had some juice in it, I was going to take it and start my life over. Your ridiculous notions of what the world would be like with the Faceless Ones in charge? Why the hell would I ever want a world like that? I happen to like this one. I happen to like mortals. They're not bad. Sure, I've killed a whole bunch of them over the years, but who hasn't? He sighed. But the crystal doesn't have any power in it. You've ruined me! Rancid got to his feet. He was short, so it didn't take long. Blasphemer? He said. Kiln didn't respond to that. His eyes were on the crystal. It'll be a challenge finding someone to buy it. But so long as I sell before the news spreads that it's just one big lump of costume jewellery, I should recoup some of my losses, at least. Rancid snatched up the crystal, held it to his chest. You stay back! Rancid, come on! Don't be stupid! Rancid turned and ran, tripped over a cable and stumbled, fell to his knees, and the crystal jolted out of his grip, went bouncing into the shadows. A moment later, a figure stepped out of those shadows. Tall, slender, wearing a dark blue three-piece suit, complete with hat. The moonlight fell across the white of his skull as he looked at the crystal in his gloved hands. I've been chasing you and this damn thing for far too long, Skulduggery Pleasant said. Rancid shook his head. No, not you. Please, not you. Every time I've come close, you've managed to stay just out of reach, Pleasant continued, whether it be by cunning or pure dumb luck. Without meaning to be rude, it was invariably the latter. Every time I've made a concentrated effort to catch you, something has pulled me away. Killers, hell worlds, remnants, alternate dimensions, ex-girlfriends. But today it is my pleasure, my absolute unconditional pleasure, to finally say the words, Rancid Fines, you're under arrest. No! Screamed Rancid, scrambling up again. No! Not when I'm so close! He dived for the crystal, but Pleasant tossed it over Rancid's head, and it dropped into the hands of a woman in black, her dark hair falling across her face. So this is what we've been looking for, on and off, since I was 13 years old, said Valkyrie Cain. I was looking for it a lot longer than that, Pleasant responded. First time I even caught a glimpse of it, it was 1943, and I was crouching in the dark, surrounded by Nazis. They were talking about the massive amounts of power it could generate, but I've yet to see any evidence of that. Its power is limitless, Rancid wailed. Nazis, Cain said, ignoring him completely. I'd have loved to have fought Nazis. I bet you could keep on punching them and you wouldn't feel even the slightest bit bad about it. Nazis were pretty punchable, Skulduggery agreed. Still are. Kiln cleared his throat and held up his hands. Thank God you're here, he said. Rancid Fines was going to kill me. I was not, shrieked Rancid.
This guy? Said Cain. This guy was going to kill you? Kiln nodded. Yes. This guy right here, who needs to either stop crying or wipe his nose? This guy was going to kill you? Don't let the tears or the nose fool you, said Kiln. He's merciless. He certainly looks it. But I'm afraid you're under arrest too. The Crystal of the Saints has been on the forbidden items list for a long time. It has? Right there in the catastrophic consequences column. That does sound serious, Kiln said. And you're not going to let me go, are you? I didn't think so. See, that presents me with something of a dilemma. You want to arrest me, and I don't want to be arrested. I can see how a dilemma would arise. So I only have one recourse. I have to resort to violence. Ah, said Pleasant. Not a good idea. Cain shrugged. We excel at violence. We exceed at violence. You don't want to resort to violence with us, said Cain. It won't go well for you. Kiln nodded. I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate you saying it. And while people a lot more powerful than I have tried to kill you before now, and I've heard about how badly that has gone for them, I can't help but think that maybe they failed because they just weren't me, you know? 3 masked figures in black, with just their eyes visible, stepped out beside Kiln. Ninjas, Cain whispered. Then louder. We're going to fight ninjas? The first ninja took out a sword. The second took out a 3-sectioned staff. The third filled his hands with throwing stars. Sweet blessed baby Jesus, said Cain. We're going to fight ninjas. The third ninja flung the stars and Cain turned, the stars bouncing off her shoulder. He joined the ninja with the 3-sectioned staff and they went after Pleasant, who started hurling fireballs while the one with the sword lunged at Cain. The sword slashed at her, knocking the crystal from her hands. But the blade, like the throwing stars, failed to get through her suit. Cain dodged another slash and charged, crashing into him. Kiln crept forward, scooped up the crystal. No! Rancid yelled, diving and wrapping his arms round Kiln's leg. Stop that! Said Kiln, trying to kick him off. But there wasn't a power on this earth that could dislodge Rancid Fines. That stays with me! I'm so close to unlocking its secrets! If you were ever going to unlock anything, Kiln said, doing his best to walk away, you'd have done so by now. The air rippled, and one of the ninjas, the one currently on fire, went flying through the air like a screaming meteor. I will not let you take away my life's work, Rancid muttered through gritted teeth as he was dragged through the dirt and long grass. The ninja with the sword had lost his weapon, but he was still kicking Valkyrie Cain around the place. Finally, she just blasted him with what looked like white lightning, and he slammed into Kiln. The crystal fell, and Rancid grabbed it, kissed it, and scrambled away, leaving the fight to continue behind him. Chapter 2. Students lined up by year in the gymnasium, chatting among themselves, a sea of mismatched heights and weights, and black blazers with different coloured piping on the lapels. Omen darkly made his way towards the back. The 6th years lounged against the wall, studiously aloof. Another month, and they'd be gone, leaving their school days in the dust and embarking on whatever there was to embark on. Exciting times lay ahead, no doubt. A mere 2 years ago, 6th years had seemed huge and tall and intimidatingly mature. Now Omen was as tall as most of them, even if that recent growth spurt had resulted in even more ungainliness in his movements. One day, he promised himself, he'd be able to walk into a room without being in danger of tripping over his own knees. He joined his fellow 5th years. They didn't have the luxury of a wall to lean nonchalantly against, but they managed their lounging pretty well, considering. Axelia looked was standing with Ula and Bella, and Omen smiled at her, and she smiled back, which made his heart sing. He got to his usual spot, standing beside his brother. Augur looked tired. He had dark rings under his eyes, and he slouched, as if standing up straight was just too much effort. He'd been like this, disaffected, for the last 3 months, ever since he'd killed the king of the Darklands, and he was only getting worse. Never walked in, and Omen searched for a sign that would allow him to figure out which gender his best friend was identifying with. He couldn't find one. Ever since Never had had his hair darkened and cut short, all except for the sweeping fringe, Omen had resorted to guessing. It hadn't worked out well so far. Never had broken up with Augur just 2 weeks ago, but, as usual, refused to let any of that drag her into a bad mood. He winked at Augur as she passed, and Augur answered with a smile, the first smile Omen had seen him wear in ages, and Never took his place beside Omen. "You're looking well," she said, eyes on the stage where the teachers were assembling. "Thank you," Omen responded, surprised. Never waited a few moments, then looked at him. "And now it's your turn to say something complimentary about me." "Oh," said Omen. "I like your hair." "You've already told me that." "So, yes? Are you... am I?" Omen sighed. "Are you identifying as male or female?" Never laughed. "I love how polite and awkward you get when you have to ask that. My identity is evolving, Omen. Right now, I'm not feeling particularly male or particularly female. So today, I'm just identifying as me." "And pronouns?" "Pronouns right now would be they and their." Omen nodded. "Cool. I'm still waiting for the compliment, by the way." "What do you want me to say? If I have to tell you what to compliment, then it won't count, will it?" "I suppose not," Omen said. "You look nice. Is that enough of a compliment? I don't know. Why do you feel restricted to my physical appearance? I gave you a compliment on your physical appearance because I knew you'd appreciate that on account of how you never think you look good. But I know I look good, Omen. There are such things as mirrors, and I do use them, so I know I'm looking particularly gorgeous this morning. But what about saying something regarding me as a person, rather than just a piece of really hot meat you like to ogle?" "Was I ogling?" "Everyone ogles me, Omen. I am intensely ogleable." "Not sure that's a word, but, okay then." "Never. You're really smart." "Thank you." "And confident." "Yes." "And I wish I could be more like you." Never blinked at him. "Oh. What, was that wrong?" "No," Never said. "No, that was... lovely." Omen shrugged. The teachers were lined up and talking quietly among themselves, all except for Mr. Peccant, who was glaring down at the first years. Omen grinned. The poor first years were so tiny and so cute and so sweet and so easily intimidated. It was actually funny how a sour look from a teacher could silence even the most... Peccant raised his eyes to Omen, and Omen looked away immediately and blushed and tried very hard not to pee. Principal Duenna took to the stage, followed by the vice-principal. Once she had reached the exact centre of the stage, Duenna smiled and waited for the chatter to die down. When it didn't, Peccant stepped forward. "Shut up!" he roared, and everyone did indeed shut up. Peccant stepped back. Duenna cleared her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Peccant. Children, we have exactly 27 days until May 31st, the Féile na Dríochta, and the end of the school term. Your exams begin in 19 days. You should have already received your schedules, and today marks the beginning of your revision classes." Everyone cheered, and Duenna looked unimpressed. "Do not take revision classes to mean free classes," she said. "You are expected to attend each and every one, and attend them in full school uniform.
There may have been some slacking under past principles, but under my watch you will behave with the dignity I expect." There were loud, unsubtle mutterings that Duenna chose to ignore. "While the 6th years and 3rd years will be sitting state exams, the rest of you will be facing your own end-of-year exams, and while it may be tempting to dismiss these as irrelevant, let me assure you that they are not. We will be paying very close attention to those of you who slack off, and there will be repercussions." She cast a baleful eye over the hall, and then broke into a jarring smile. "I'm sure all of you are excited for Félin a Dríochta, or Dríocht, to use its only approved abbreviation. That is not to be shortened to Dríochta, or the Féile, the Fla, the Fecht, or any other inaccurate term. We want you all to have fun, but to have accurate fun. Dríocht only comes round once every 72 years, so I was barely older than some of you here now when I got to celebrate the last one. It was, if you'll pardon the pun, a magical time." She chuckled. Nobody else did. She turned to Peccant. "Do they know what a pun is?" "They should," he growled. Duenna shrugged. "Anyway, our glorious leader has decreed that Roarhaven will be at the epicentre of all Dríocht festivities around the world. In his words, we shall be a beacon of light that shows the way home." "What the hell does that mean?" Never muttered. "And as such, the last day of school will be a half day, after which you'll be able to go out and enjoy the carnival on the streets of our city." Omen cheered with the rest of them. Only Augur stayed quiet. Duenna checked her watch as the cheering continued, making sure it stayed within the time she'd allotted for it. When enough seconds had passed, she held up a hand and the hall fell silent. "Now a bit of housekeeping. All magic theory classes will be moved to the history room until Friday, and the forging official documents modules will be held in the magic theory room. Tomorrow there will be screens set up in the dining hall over lunchtime so we can watch the acting Supreme Mage's speech live. He's announcing a new public policy, which is of interest to us all, I should imagine. Also, Mr. Hunnan has asked me to remind you that you must bring your own gum shields to combat classes. You cannot ask to share one. OK, you have 3 minutes to get to your first class. Dismissed." They filed out of the gymnasium, year by year, like toothpaste being squeezed through a nozzle. Once out of the doors, however, the toothpaste went everywhere, and Omen battled to get to his locker. Someone tugged at his sleeve. "Hey, Tiago," he said, cursing himself. "Hi," Tiago responded, thrown this way and that by the passing students, most of whom were bigger and older than him. "So, any news on—" "It's been taken care of," Omen said. Tiago nodded, and was lost to the crowd for a glorious moment before he lunged back into view. "Right," Tiago said, stumbling up beside him. "Right. It's very hard to see if anything's happening, you know. Trust me on this, it's all going to be fine. Maybe I should talk to Augur." "No," Omen said quickly. "The best thing to do is stay away from Augur. Don't ask him any questions. Don't bring it up in conversation. Just relax, all right?" "All right," Tiago said, nodding. "All right. This is very important, though." "He knows that, Tiago. I told him that. Leave it with him and it'll be sorted, okay? Go on now. Get to class." Tiago looked like he was about to continue talking, so Omen guided him away from the lockers and let the stream of students snatch him. He took out his books and closed the locker as the bell rang. He turned to go, and Never was standing there. "Is Augur okay?" they asked. "It's just, he's being very quiet lately. Like, really quiet. Do you know if he's okay? Have you spoken to him?" "I speak to him all the time," Omen said, starting to walk. "But have you spoken to him about why he's so quiet? If he needs to tell me something, he'll tell me." Never arched an eyebrow. "Yes, because that works in every single case of someone needing to talk about something difficult.
He hasn't been the same since the King of the Darklands. Would you expect him to be? No, said Never. But that's not the point, is it? They took Omen's arm and stopped him. The corridor was almost empty now. Augur killed someone. It doesn't matter if the guy he killed was a murderer who would have gone on to kill, like, everyone in the world. Augur still used that obsidian blade thing and wiped him from existence. He killed him in a way no one has ever been killed before. Augur's traumatized. He talked to a therapist about it. Never sneered. A school-appointed therapist, Omen. Barely more than a guidance counsellor. If I were him, I'd be suing the school for letting it happen in the first place. And I'd be suing the High Sanctuary, and I'd be seeking compensation from Roarhaven and every damn magical community around the world. Omen frowned. I've never heard of sorcerers suing each other. I don't think it's a thing. It should be, Never responded. You know the real problem? The real problem with this magical society of ours is that it's so small and so secretive that no one's ever really held accountable. Okay. What happens when a mortal politician does something bad? They're fired because they broke the rules, or they quit because they're shamed into it. Unless you're Martin Flannery, said Omen, smirking. Or Donald Trump. Or that other guy. Never ignored him. Convention, Omen. I personally despise the notion in general, but it does have its uses, and one of the main ones is to keep a check on the people in power. We don't have that. Until a few years ago, we didn't even have a supreme mage. Grand mages used to have to answer to other grand mages, but who does Creed answer to? Mrs. Creed? He's not married. Oh, then probably nobody. Nobody, Never said, nodding. Exactly. Sorry, but what does this have to do with Augur? Not a whole lot. I got sidetracked. Omen looked around. Apart from them, the corridor was empty. We really have to get to class, Never. And you've got to talk to your brother, Never said. I get that you've always seen him as this indestructible force for good, but what are you going to do now that he's been revealed as human, eh? You think about that, Omen. You think about that. And then Never teleported to class, and Omen was left standing in the middle of the corridor. Peccant appeared beside him. Mr. Darkly, he said gruffly. Mr. Peccant. You're late for class, Mr. Darkly, Peccant said, walking away. Detention. Omen sagged. Chapter 3. The sound of his own breathing was starting to get to him again. Every few months he'd notice it, notice the way it rasped in his ears, amplified by the mask. The mask. The bloody mask. God, how he yearned to rip it off his head, to grab that ridiculous beak and just pull it all away and feel fresh air on his skin. How he yearned to scratch an itch through the suit, to rub his eyes when they were tired, to rake his fingernails across his scalp. This feeling of intense irritation would last a few days, during which his temper would grow short and his replies turn snippy. But he'd emerge, as always, with a resounding, if weary, sense of resignation. This was the mission he'd signed up for, after all. This was the cost. But lately, as in the last 3 months, there'd been an entirely new reason for this dissatisfaction. He hadn't been able to show his practically adopted daughter his smile. He looked round. Where was his practically adopted daughter? Sebastian put down the book he'd been failing to read and went looking for her. Darkess, he called. Sweetie. He found her in the kitchen. Little Darkess, the kid who'd aged 2 years in her first 2 months, and then doubled that in the 3rd month, sitting on the floor, covered in flour. He didn't even know he had any flour. He certainly hadn't bought any. Despite the fact that he didn't have to, and couldn't, eat with this damn suit on, the others in the Darkess Society had made sure the kitchen was fully stocked at all times with every conceivable foodstuff. Not that he ever got a chance to make anything. Every day, Bennett or Lily or Ulysses or Demure would pop over with homemade meals for their adorable little black-haired god. Sebastian barely had to lift a finger anymore, now that the few weeks of bottle feeding were behind them. All in all, this unexpected bout of fatherhood hadn't been that bad since the Dark Kess Society had been by his side the entire time. Along with the food preparation, Forby had hooked up the entire house with baby monitors and nanny cams, and Tari and Kimura were taking care of babysitting duties whenever Sebastian needed a break. And then there was Darkess herself. He'd been there when she'd been born, had watched the pregnant Darkess melt into and become her own daughter. The newborn had wailed and cried for a bit, but by the time the Darkess Society had rushed over, she was asleep in Sebastian's arms. They'd cooed and oohed, cleaned her up, dressed her, and then they'd all just stared at her. It was weird. Sweet, but weird. By her second month, Darkess was already walking. 2 weeks after that, she was flying. Her first words were, "The world is a vampire." Sebastian didn't know what the hell that meant, until Bennett told him it was the first line in a Smashing Pumpkins song. Most of her early proclamations were lines from songs, actually. Lots of Muse in there, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, little bit of Britney. Ulysses had a theory that these were all memories inherited from her mother self. Phrases that were simply the first to rise to the surface in the vast ocean that was Darkess's mind. And it was a vast ocean. Before she'd given birth, Darkess had sent out tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of versions of herself to scour the universe, collecting information. To what end, Sebastian didn't know. But it was all locked inside the head of this blinking, flower-headed child. He scooped her up. "You," he said, "are a mess." Darkess giggled. Chapter 4. Valkyrie moved round in a crouch, arms crossed over her chest, her steps small but quick, and her eyes locked onto her little sister's. She settled and flung her hands up to either side, and Alice darted in, jabbed once with her left, threw a right, and then ducked a swipe and popped up to deliver 3 alternating uppercuts, finishing the sequence with an elbow shot before bouncing away. "Good," Valkyrie said, crossing her arms again, turning the pads on her hands inwards as she circled. Alice circled the opposite way, her gloved hands up, her elbows tucked in tight, her face flushed, and her blonde hair falling out of its ponytail. Settling again, Valkyrie presented the pads, and Alice took a slight step to readjust, and then repeated the sequence, her grin widening. The elbow shot came in, and Valkyrie brought her hands back into her chest and straightened up, echoing the grin. "Nice," she said. "Gloves off." They did some stretching to cool down, then hung the gloves and the pads from the hooks on the garage wall. Valkyrie broke down the interlocking gym mats as Alice demonstrated her latest dance moves, a creature of boundless and unrelenting energy. They stored the large squares out of the way and passed into the house. Alice ran up the stairs, and Valkyrie went into the kitchen. "How'd she do?" their father asked from underneath the sink. "Brilliant as always, and getting even better," said Valkyrie, grabbing her water bottle from the fridge. "Need any help down there?" "I've got it handled," Desmond replied, straining slightly. There was a clatter of wrench against pipe and a hiss of pain. "Ow!" Valkyrie took a swig. "They have professionals for this kind of thing, you know." "I can fix a sink, Steph. You might have saved the world a bunch of times, and your sister might be an aspiring ninja, but I have yet to meet a sink I couldn't beat. Could you hand me the next wrench up?" Valkyrie took the wrench from his outstretched hand and found the next biggest in the toolbox on the table. She passed it to him. "So have you saved the world recently?" he asked, amid more clanging. "Not for ages," she replied. "What was that thing last week that your mum was telling me about? That sounded fairly serious." Valkyrie shrugged.
It got serious, yeah, but not end of the world serious. Just some psycho who'd killed a few sorcerers. Did you catch him? We did. Is he in that floating prison? No. Cold Heart is being fitted with extra fail-safes to make sure it's never hijacked again, so it's still out of action. He was sent to Iron Point. It's not any nicer. Her dad gave a few small grunts of effort, then wriggled out from beneath the sink. He held his hands up, and Valkyrie pulled him to his feet. Right then, he said, and turned on the tap. It rattled for a moment, and then water blasted out. Success, he said, turning it off. You see, daughter, I too have my uses. I never doubted it. He turned as Alice came in. Ah, the ninja returns. How was the training today, little dragon? It was fun, Alice said brightly. I did really well, I think. Stephanie, did I do well? You did brilliantly. Alice grinned and shrugged, trying her best to be modest. Dad, when's Mom back? I have to go to dance class at 2:45. She'll be back in time, don't worry, and if she isn't, I can take you. Alice lost her grin. No, Dad, we're always late when you take me. Mom's on time for things. You always say we leave and then you go to the toilet and you take forever. And I hate walking in late. I feel so stupid. I feel like everyone's looking at me and... Tears welled up and Desmond hurried over, dropping to his knees and holding her shoulders. Hey there, look at me, sweetheart. Look at me. Good girl. You won't be late. Do you know why? Because your mother will be back. But what if she isn't? Then I'll take you, said Valkyrie. Those big eyes widened. On your motorbike? Valkyrie laughed. No, not on the bike. I'll take Dad's car. You won't be late, okay? Trust me. Alice nodded and wiped her eyes. Okay. By the way, said Desmond, I am deeply offended that nobody trusts me to be on time for anything. I am on time for loads of things, but all anyone remembers is when I'm late, or I forget, or I've got the wrong day. I have a lot of stuff on my mind, you know. I happen to run my own business. I have employees to worry about. There's this weird cat that stares at me every time I leave the house, so I apologise if occasionally I'm late for something, but life gets in the way. Can I go now? Alice asked. Desmond sighed. Sure. He stood, watching her as she wandered out of the room. After a moment, he looked at Valkyrie. That was a close one. I mean, she's getting better all the time. The, whatever we're calling them, dark periods are getting further and further apart. But anything can set her off. You handled it really well, said Valkyrie, struggling to keep her voice even. That was an easy one. She's still buzzing from training with you, and she's got her dance class to look forward to. It's harder at the end of the day when she's tired. But you know, we're doing what the psychologist told us to do. We're reinforcing her. We're getting her to talk about how she's feeling. I just wish we knew what caused all this. If we did, if she'd just tell us that... He trailed off. You're doing what you can, Valkyrie said. Yes, we are, said Desmond. And you're helping enormously, by the way. She loves her big sister training her to defend herself. All this positivity is just what she needs. Valkyrie nodded. Her dad started packing away his tools. I wonder if it's got anything to do with the magic side of things. Valkyrie froze. You're the expert, he said. Could it have? My grandfather had pretty drastic mood swings, and Gordon could be a moody so-and-so when he wanted to be, although that was always put down to an artistic temperament. Fergus is a permanent grouch, as you well know. Do you think the fact that we're descended from that last of the ancients guy means we're prone to this kind of behaviour? What about you? Have you ever experienced it? He looked at her, as if he needed to see how she'd react. I'm bright as a summer's day, she lied. He smiled. Yes, you are. So how about the rest of us? Do you think we're cursed to have these dark periods? She frowned. Do you have them? He shrugged. We all have moments when we're less than cheerful.
He closed the toolbox. Or has the magic got nothing to do with it at all? Am I blaming the last of the ancients for something that's really not his fault? If Valkyrie had been waiting for the perfect moment to tell him the truth, this was it. If she'd been waiting for an ideal opportunity to inform him that the Edgeleys weren't descended from the last of the ancients, that they, in fact, had the blood of the Faceless Ones running through their veins instead, then her time had come. But she hadn't been waiting for such a moment. She had no intention of ever telling her family that they were descended from the bad guys, not the heroes. So she said, I really don't know. And her dad shrugged and carried his toolbox out to the garage. She got home, and the vast emptiness of Grimwood House was shattered by the German shepherd sprinting towards her even as she shut the door. Valkyrie dropped to her knees and cuddled the dog, then rolled on the floor, Xena licking her face and neck, scrambling round her. She had something to eat, sat on the couch with the TV muted, talking to Militza on the phone, and then went to bed. Xena curled up by her knees. Chapter 5 6 years ago. 20 minutes driving with the radio on. That's as much as he could take. It was better than last week, and he planned to be better again the following week. The radio interfered with his mind. Music stirred feelings, and he wasn't used to those. Talk radio drew his thoughts from hiding, and he wasn't used to that either. Coda Quell was used to quiet. Talk radio had angry people, voices cracking over the airwaves. He couldn't understand angry people. He couldn't understand people, mortal or sorcerer, for that matter. They were all just bundles of contradictory emotions he struggled to comprehend. He clicked the radio off and relaxed to the soothing hum of his truck's engine and the rumble of tires on a dirt road. One bit at a time. That's what they told him when he left. Rejoin the world, one bit at a time. Rejoin. He could have told them there and then that it was the wrong word to use. How do you rejoin something you barely have any memory of leaving? But he didn't tell them that, and he didn't ask that question, because cleavers don't ask questions. But he wasn't a cleaver anymore. The way of the scythe was his way no longer. People called his kind something different now. He was a ripper. That's the word they used. It didn't bother him, because nothing bothered him. He'd had that trained out of him since he was 9 years old. They called his kind rippers, and meant it as an insult. It was an attack made from a position of weakness, and it denoted fear. They were scared of people like him. They thought cleavers should be cleavers forever. They didn't like the idea of cleavers hanging up the grey and walking among them. Quell didn't understand things like fear anymore. This was something else he would have to relearn. He slowed the truck at the gate and got out. He'd never been to Colorado before. He liked the air. It was crisp, clean. On the other side of the gate, a jeep was parked. Its back door was open. There were fence posts inside. A young woman appeared, came down a steep bank, leaving clouds of dust in her wake. Her dark hair was tied back into a ponytail. Her jeans were dirty, and her boots were scuffed, and her t-shirt was faded. Her arms were strong. She had a hammer tucked into her belt, and she was carrying a broken post. She looked at Quell, but didn't say anything. She threw the broken post into the back of the jeep, then took a bottle of water from a bag she had hidden there, and took a long, long drink. She returned the bottle to the bag, added the hammer, and came up to the gate. "You're on time," she said. "Is that the kind of person you are? You on time for stuff?" "Yes," said Quell. You're a ripper, then. It wasn't a question, so he didn't answer. I want training, she said. I want the kind of training you had. Is that possible? No. But you'll train me hard. You'll push me. Yes. What's your name? Coda Quail. She nodded. I'm Valkyrie, she said. Valkyrie Cain. Chapter 6. She woke without opening her eyes, aware of the dog on the bed with her. Valkyrie lay like an inverted question mark, her legs hooking round Xena's curled-up form. She reached down, felt fur, gave it a scratch, and then Xena was standing over her and slobbering onto her face. Valkyrie laughed as the big wet tongue left a trail of saliva across her cheek. But she could only manage a few seconds of neck-licking before she had to sit up, grab the dog, and pull her down with her. Xena's tail thumped madly. That tongue lolled out of her grinning mouth. Such a goof, Valkyrie said to her, and Xena didn't deny it. She filled Xena's food bowl, ate breakfast, showered, and left Xena in the huge dog run she'd built out behind the house. Then she pulled on her helmet and took the bike to Roarhaven. Militza was waiting for her at a table outside the cafe she liked in the arts district. They kissed, and Valkyrie put her helmet on one of the empty chairs. Militza had a coffee in front of her. Her eyes widened. I didn't order you one. Valkyrie smiled. Then it's a good thing I'm a big girl and I can do things for myself. She caught the server's eye and asked for a black coffee. I always order you one whenever you're late, Militza said. My head's just not in it today. It really isn't. She nodded to the cup in front of her. See that? I wanted to order a macchiato and didn't realise until after I'd paid that I'd ordered an Americano. I mean, I could have told the barista I'd made a mistake, but he looked so happy making the Americano, and I didn't want to spoil that. You're a complicated lady, said Valkyrie. Busy day at work? Not especially, Militza said. I had a class first thing, but I don't have another one till after lunch. Are you going to be watching Creed's speech? I'm going to be more than watching it. Skulduggery and I are going to be there. Part of our duties as arbiters includes providing security for the big boss, something Skulduggery neglected to mention when he invited me back. So we're going to see it live, baby. You are so lucky. I know, right? So what has you so distracted? Necromancer stuff. I heard you on the phone yesterday talking about your old friends leaving, or something like that. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but you were literally right beside me. Militza smiled. No, it's not that. I mean, yes, there have been a few necromancers leaving the order, but I wouldn't have called them friends exactly. Why are they leaving? Not sure, to be honest. I haven't been inside a temple in years, and I was never really into the quasi-religious aspect of necromancy, but apparently there's been quite a radical shift in direction lately. Is that a bad thing? Valkyrie asked. Until a few years ago, the Order's teachings meant it advocated killing half the world's population. Militza raised an eyebrow. Only a few years ago, was it? Well, that was 10 years ago. It wasn't that far back, Valkyrie said. All that Deathbringer stuff, Melancholia, Lord Vile returning, the whole... Oh my God, it was. It's been 10 years. I've faced some scary killers and monsters in my time, but that is truly terrifying. I'm getting old. A few seconds ticked by. Okay, that was your cue. Militza blinked. Sorry? What was? Your cue to tell me I'm not getting old. Well, of course you're not getting old. You're going to stay young for literally hundreds of years, same as me. We can stay young together, forever. It'll be dead romantic. Valkyrie's coffee arrived. She smiled at the server and thanked her and took a sip as the girl moved off. Flirt, Melissa said. Always, Valkyrie responded. So, if it's not the necromancers that have you distracted, what is it? I've been offered a job. You have a job. I've been offered another job. As a teacher? Melissa tucked her hair behind her ear. Research, she said. They want me to be part of a team. Researching what? Magic. Okay, well, you'd love that, so what's the catch? And who's they? The High Sanctuary. Valkyrie soured. Creed? The High Sanctuary isn't just Damocles Creed. There are over 24 different departments, all with their own heads, all with their own teams. Did you know there's an entire department dedicated to repairing the scepter of the ancients after Malevolent snapped it in half? Good luck with that, Valkyrie grunted. Yeah, anyway, they want me to be part of a team helping to research the source. The source of all magic? That source? And what did you say? I said I had to think about it. Right. You obviously don't think I should do it. It doesn't matter what I think. Of course it does. Valkyrie did her best to remain quiet. So, Melissa pressed, what's your opinion? You're going to blurt it out anyway over the next few days, so you may as well get it. The words spilled out of Valkyrie's mouth. Creed wants to widen the source in order to make sorcerers stronger, so that if we ever do go to war with the mortals, we'll slaughter them more efficiently. It's research, Melissa countered. Important research. That Creed's going to use for his own ends. How can you not see what a bad idea this is? This is what I've wanted since I was 15 years old. That doesn't mean it'll be used responsibly. The kind of people I have to take down every day are powerful enough already. They don't need to be able to destroy more buildings or kill more innocents. They're doing fine with that as it is. Melissa shook her head. I knew you'd react this way. I'm sorry. Whatever, Melissa said, and glanced at her phone. I have to get back to the school. Are you mad at me? Melissa picked up her bag and stood. Yes, she said, but only because you make sense. Love you. Love you too, Valkyrie said, and Melissa walked off. Valkyrie finished her coffee and rode to the High Sanctuary. A sizable crowd had already gathered for Creed's speech, filling the circle. City Guard officers had to clear a path for Valkyrie to get to the underground car park. She parked beside the Bentley. Skulduggery stood watching as she turned off the engine and leaned the bike into the kickstand, swung her leg off and removed her helmet. She frowned at him as she hung the helmet off the handlebar. There's something different about you, she said finally. Have you done something to your head? He didn't respond. She peered closer. Oh my God, you have! That isn't your skull. The cheekbones are lower, the jaw is narrower, the eye sockets are rounder. The eye sockets are the same, he said, walking away. More or less. But you're right. This is one of my spares. I'm in the process of polishing and strengthening my own skull, so I'll be wearing this one for a couple of weeks. Valkyrie fell into step beside him. You polish your skull? Every few years, yes. Though this is the first time you've noticed. First I soak it for 8 days in a special solution to reinforce its density and to prevent any unsightly fractures from appearing. I do this for every part of me, actually, as it also serves to add significant weight to my body. So you have heavy bones? Quite heavy, yes. For bones, I mean. The weight gives me a greater purchase in physical struggles and adds to my strength. Once the 8 days are up and the skull has been dried, I go over it with a range of sanding sponges,
ingredients from fine to microfine. Without getting too technical about it, too late. I soak it again, leave it for 27 hours, then go to work with a rotary tool fitted with a 7/8 of an inch muslin buff and a fine compound. They stepped onto a pair of tiles that rose into the air and took them, spinning slowly, up to the high sanctuary. The moment they stepped off into the large marble foyer, Skulduggery continued. I soak it for a third time for 3 days exactly, not 1 minute longer, though this is more of a tradition than an absolute necessity. I'm sure, if one were so predisposed, the skull could be soaked for a few minutes under 3 days exactly, or a few minutes over. But what would be the point of going to all that trouble if you were prepared to embrace lackadaisicality at the very last moment? Valkyrie waited a moment before responding. Are you done? I didn't want to interrupt in case there was more to that incredibly useless slab of information you just whacked down in front of me. You were curious. Wasn't that curious? Even so, now you know what I do when it's time to ensure my head remains in tip-top condition. Valkyrie took the black skull amulet from her jeans and pressed it to her chest, then tapped it. She caught her reflection in one of the large mirrors as the necronaut suit flowed over her clothes. A different design each time it came out, dependent on her requirements. Today it looked almost military officer smart, perfect for public engagements. They left the high sanctuary through one of the side exits, stepping out onto the wing of the temporary stage that had been erected. The city guard were handling crowd control, while the cleavers stood watch. Valkyrie had preferred it when cleavers took the lead in things like this. They may have been scary killing machines, but they were incorruptible scary killing machines. The city guard, on the other hand, were made up of people who were growing to love the power their uniforms afforded them. But there wasn't much alternative to the current situation. The cleavers' numbers had been steadily whittled down for years, seeing as how they'd been used, on occasion, as little more than cannon fodder, instead of the highly trained combatants they were. Maybe it had something to do with the visored helmets they wore. It was easier to disregard someone's humanity when you let yourself forget they had a face. As Valkyrie watched, the cleavers stiffened slightly, moving from standing at attention to standing at even more attention, if such a thing was even possible. And a moment later, the doors swung open, and Damocles Creed walked onto the stage. Chapter 7. The crowd reacted like he was part rock star, part TV evangelist. They screamed, they hollered, they whistled, and when they'd run out of screams and hollers and whistles, they started the chants and the slogans and the cheers, and once they'd exhausted those, they went back to screaming and hollering and whistling. The acting supreme mage stood there like a big bald monolith, barely smiling. He wasn't so much soaking it all in as merely waiting for it to stop. That was something else his followers loved about him. His pragmatism, his indifference to being adored. He hadn't even dressed up for the occasion. His massive frame was covered in a simple robe, frayed and faded. Poking out at the bottom was a pair of work boots. When the applause finally died down, he stepped up to the microphone. I look out, and I recognize a lot of faces, he said. I see these faces every week. I see some of them every day, in the cathedral. You pray with me. I appreciate that. I truly do. And I also see a lot of faces I don't know. This warms my heart. To know that our message is reaching you, to know that it's spreading, is a beautiful thing. A fresh round of cheers and applause that he didn't let go on for too long before holding up a hand for quiet. We live in an astonishing city. The first city of magic. That's what they're calling it. Look around. See the person next to you. That's a mage. See the person on the other side of the street. That's a mage too. In fact, the only people in this city who aren't mages are the ones doing the washing up. Laughter tore through the crowd like that was the funniest goddamn thing they'd ever heard. Creed held up a hand again. Was that cruel? He asked. Was that a cruel thing for me to say? We all know people, don't we, who insist we not be cruel to the mortals. To them, I apologize. Someone shouted something. More people laughed. But even our well-meaning friends have got to admit it's nice to be part of a city of mages. To live and work beside each other, not to be worried about hiding who we are from the stumbling, mumbling mortals. Young people, those fine young mages of Coryval Academy, they can barely remember what it was like to live like that. But I remember. Do you? Shouts, roars. They remembered. Yes, he said. Exactly. If we were lucky, we had our communities. We had our neighborhoods. Now we have an entire city, and what a city it is. A place of beauty and wonder and, yes, magic. What's next for us? A country? A continent? A world? A world of mages. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine the freedom? The crowd imagined it. They howled their approval. Creed nodded. And how did we get here, my friends? Did we get here by being meek and quiet? Did we get here by slinking around in the shadows, fearful of the footfall of mortal man? Did we get here by talking in whispers so that mortal woman wouldn't overhear, wouldn't find out our secrets? Or did we get here by being strong, by demonstrating strength, by being fearless, by dominating? Oh, the crowd liked that. They liked that an awful lot. Creed leaned on the podium as if he was leaning on a bar. Do you know what I think? I think domination is the way to go. I do. I know how bad that sounds. You hear the word dominate and you think oppression, don't you? And I'm with you. Oppression is what we want to avoid. Who knows oppression better than us, who have lived until now in a world dominated by petty mortals? But domination, if applied correctly, can be a positive force in the universe. I think we march forward from this day on, and we dominate. We have a street in some far-off mortal city, we take the neighborhood. We have a neighborhood, we take the city. We have the city, we take the country. Why not? Who's going to stop us? Mortals? They laughed. He nodded. You understand. You get it. I knew you would, quite honestly. You're smart people. You're aware of the world around you. You can see the way things are going. You can see the situation evolving right before your eyes. And I'm saying this not only as Archcanon of the Church of the Faceless, but also in my role as acting Supreme Mage of the High Sanctuary. We've done a good job, we sorcerers. We've protected the mortals, and we've allowed them to thrive. It has been, let's say, an interesting experiment. More laughter. But I think the experiment is coming to an end, if you want my honest opinion. We've given them chance after chance, opportunity after opportunity, and each and every time they have squandered that chance and wasted that opportunity. I know that a lot of us here view the mortals with huge and genuine affection. Some of them are our friends, our family. but their short lives make them entirely unsuited to running things. If you can only expect to live for 80 or 90 years, where's your motivation to make the world a better place? But if you live 500 years, if you live 1,000 years, you're going to want to ensure that your home stays in the best possible condition. He paused, then shrugged. I don't know. I might be wrong. Am I wrong? I might be wrong. You'll notice that I'm not reading from a carefully worded speech. He nodded as they laughed. This isn't like my sermons. I'm not up here to impart unto you a grand lesson or an important moral. I'm just me, standing in front of a group of like-minded people, thinking out loud. Maybe this is the way forward. Maybe it isn't. But if it is, we've really got to lead by example, don't you think? If we want to change the world, that change starts right here, in our streets, in our homes, in our hearts. I reckon that sacrifices need to be made, and I reckon we're the ones to do it. Who else is strong enough? Who else is tough enough? This is Roarhaven. These walls held back 10,000 warlocks and wretchlings. These people, the city guard, the cleavers, they defeated both an invading army from another dimension and a horde of Draugr. There's tough, and then there's Roarhaven tough. Cheers, fists pumping the air. So we lead by example, said Creed. To instill discipline, we demonstrate discipline. Which means we're going to be introducing a curfew. Only those with special dispensation will be allowed out on the streets of the city past 9 o'clock. We already have a list of people who do need to be out beyond this time for work. But if you think you also qualify, and you do not receive your pass in the next 2 days, we'll have a community liaison officer available to process your application. Bear in mind, however, that time wasters will not be tolerated. If you apply and are found wanting, you'll be fined or jailed or both, depending on the egregiousness of your error. The curfew comes into effect tonight. No cheers to that announcement. Some rumblings, though, mutterings of dissatisfaction that dried up when Creed cast his eye in that direction. The curfew is part 1 of our 3-part plan, Creed continued. The second part is in response to the, frankly alarming, lack of a faith-based culture in Roarhaven. Attendance in the cathedral has never been higher, and for that I applaud you. But there are still so many of this city's citizens who appear reluctant to set foot inside. Turn your heads, my friends, and gaze upon the dark cathedral. Yes, it's imposing. Yes, it strikes fear into the hearts of the unworthy. Yes, even its name is intimidating. But it merely does its best to reflect the awe-inspiring power of the Faceless Ones themselves. If you can't bring yourself to enter a place of worship, how will you cope when the Faceless Ones make their inevitable return to this reality and take up their rightful place as our lords and masters? We must demonstrate our worthiness. We must convince them of our love. To that end, we are opening 9 churches around Roarhaven. All the construction that's been going on in your sectors? Churches, opening today. The worship of all other deities, as of this moment, is against the law. Attendance is mandatory, at least twice a week. Be assured, we will be taking note of who attends and who doesn't. And also I will personally shake the hand and bestow the blessings of the Faceless Ones on anyone who comes forward, bravely but in confidence, to tell me the names of family members or neighbours or workmates who do not comply with this order. We're all in this together, my friends. Each one of us is a brick in a great wall.
The crowd applauded, some more enthusiastically than others.
And the third part of our plan is an unfortunate necessity. This is the part I never wanted to introduce, but I think you'll agree that I have little choice. You are good people, honest people, worthy people, and I know you won't let me down. But there are others in this city who do not share these qualities. Let's be honest, these people are dangerous. Not only to others, but also to themselves. They don't know the damage they're doing to their very souls. The Faceless Ones will change everything, and those who love them will be carried gently into the new world. Those who don't will suffer, right alongside the billions of mortals. They will try to sow discord among you. They will use tricks and subterfuge to confuse you and turn you from the righteous path. They will lie to you and tempt you with promises of an easy life. But life is hard, and it's meant to be hard, because this is the part where we prove ourselves to the dark gods. The third part of this plan will see specially selected sensitives patrolling the streets, actively scanning for subversion. I know that this is asking a lot of you. I know that it could be seen as an intrusion. The dangerous ones out there, the dissidents, the subversives, they'll try to convince you that you're losing something if you allow this. More lies, my friends. If you are worthy, if you are good and decent, you have nothing to fear. This will scare the subversives. They'll build up walls round their minds, thinking they'll evade judgment. But these sense wardens have been trained to detect just that, and so any attempt to hide their thoughts will simply draw more attention to them. If you want my advice, my brothers and sisters, you won't try to hide your thoughts. Things will be easier if you comply.
Skulduggery turned his head to Valkyrie, and she raised an eyebrow. Chapter 8. When the speech was over, and Creed had returned to the high sanctuary, Skulduggery lifted off the stage with his hands in his pockets and flew to the rooftop of the building across the wide street. Valkyrie flew alongside him, leaving a trail of crackling energy in her wake. Flying was still something of a rare ability, and one that was regarded with equal parts envy and bitterness, so not all of the comments shouted up after them were complimentary. They landed on the roof and looked at each other. "That was cheerful," she said. "Bright and optimistic. I'm enthused about the future, I tell you. Enthused." Skulduggery looked over at the high sanctuary. "Creed's planning something. I didn't think it'd be possible for him to assert any more control than he already has." She shook her head. "That'll teach me to underestimate him. A curfew, mandatory worship, and thought police. I'd say it couldn't get any worse, but I hate to make the same mistake twice. I don't suppose we can count on China Sorrows waking up from her coma anytime soon and taking her job back, can we?" "Not as far as I'm aware," Skulduggery said quietly. "This won't go down well." "With who? The citizens of this fine city? They seem to be pretty okay with most of it." "The people in that audience were followers of the Faceless Ones and Creed fanatics," Skulduggery said, looking down at the crowd as it started to disperse. "They don't represent the majority of mages in Roarhaven." "Think there'll be protests?" "I do." "We have to do something. I mean, we have to, right? We can't just let this happen. We have to do something about Creed." "I agree," Skulduggery said. "He's where all our problems stem from. I've been thinking a lot lately about the vision I had." "The one where everyone's dead, or the one where Alice is the child of the Faceless Ones?" "The Alice one. The vision where everyone's dead has already changed so much, but I haven't had a repeat of the Alice one, so for all I know, that hasn't changed at all." Skulduggery shrugged. Alternatively, it may have changed so completely that it simply doesn't happen anymore, which is why you're not seeing any reruns. I don't want to take that chance, though. Valkyrie tucked her hair behind her ears while she gathered the words she needed. Okay, so, the dilemma. The dilemma is, when Alice is 16, she's the child of the Faceless, and she's going off to fight her archenemy, the Child of the Ancients, to decide the fate of the world. So she is essentially the bad guy in this scenario. And we still have no idea who the Child of the Ancients is, do we? We do not, Skulduggery replied. I haven't been able to find any reference to such a person in the usual literature. Have you checked for any prophecies? I've checked, and there haven't been any. Keep in mind, however, that sensitives only started seeing Darkess in their visions a few years before she, or you, turned up, so there's still time for them to tune in to this particular channel. But we can safely assume that whoever the Child of the Ancients is, they're the good guy, Valkyrie said. I think we can. So my little sister is going to grow up to be the villain, and for whatever reason, I'm not around. In fact, I'm probably dead. We don't know that. In the vision, she said she missed me and seemed really sad. That sounds pretty terminal to me. I wish I could tell you to put it out of your mind. Valkyrie dismissed it with a shake of her head. Hey, don't worry about me. I went through a few years of being miserable. A few years where I figured I deserved to die. I have since changed my mind. I'm glad. Me too. I still have my dark moments, and sometimes getting out of bed in the morning is a struggle, but on the whole, I'm embracing every moment in every day. Skulduggery adjusted his cufflinks. The problem, as we've established, seems to be Damocles Creed. He's the one who's been searching for the child of the Faceless Ones for the last 200 years. He's the one with a basement full of failed experiments staring into space. Maybe we can use that. If we show people the thousands of kith he's got hidden away, that might compel the other sanctuaries to demand that he step down. You know what we need to do? We need to talk to someone who's seen what goes on in those basements of his. Temper Frey has seen it all. You know how to find him? Yes, said Skulduggery, and pointed behind them. He's over there somewhere. Valkyrie frowned. He's back in Roarhaven. I thought he left forever with his hot ninja girlfriend. He came back. Kier of the Unveiled didn't. They broke up? I don't know. I'll ask him to take us through what an activation looks like, and while we're talking, you can pry into his personal life all you like. Cool. But I don't know if that idea would even work. Even if we exposed what Creed's been doing, even if we show the kith, and we get Temper to explain exactly what went on, Creed, and before him China, has filled the top spots of practically every sanctuary around the world with his own hand-picked grand mages. They're already massively unpopular with the sorcerers they govern, so sticking by the supreme mage won't exactly do them any harm. And there's always the risk that by forcing Creed's hand, he accelerates towards his final objective before we can work out what it is and how to stop it. Whatever we do, we have to proceed with caution. Okay, said Valkyrie. So what's your plan? We assassinate him. She didn't respond for a few seconds. You're serious? Yes. This is your idea of proceeding with caution? You want to murder the Supreme Mage? I preferred assassinate, to be honest. It's the order China gave us, after all, when she sent us to take down Malevolent. Just because the previous Supreme Mage has already ordered an assassination doesn't make it okay to assassinate the current one. Is that how we deal with obstacles these days? We have an enemy and we just kill them because it's easiest? I'm quite prepared to kill one person if it saves the lives of two others. It all depends on the life, though, doesn't it? And what does that mean? Are we going to set ourselves up to judge who deserves to live and die? I don't know about this skullduggery. It's a slippery slope. If someone objects to our way of doing things, do we kill them too? When do we stop? We stop when Creed is dead. She shook her head. This is wrong. We're the good guys. That's exactly right. We are the good guys. That means we make the hard choices in order to protect everyone else. It's the only way to prevent your sister from becoming the child of the Faceless Ones. Valkyrie covered her face with her hands and thought it through. Okay, she said, looking up. I need to talk to Alice. Future Alice. If I spoke to her once, I can do it again, right? There's a psychic link there, so I'll figure out how to open it and she can answer my questions. If it turns out that Creed is the key to all this, then yes. Yes to the assassination. But we'll have to be absolutely sure there's no other way. Skulduggery nodded. You'll need some guidance to open that psychic link. I'm assuming you know of someone who can help? His head tilted. Naturally. Chapter 9. The look on this guy's face. Eyes down, probably wishing he'd turned back when he'd first seen them. His instincts had screamed at him, of course they had, but he'd kept walking, because to stop was to arouse suspicion. He was hoping he'd be able to pass by quietly. But the cops, they'd been given all this extra power, and it was filling them up from the inside. It was making their muscles bigger and their chests puff out. It was lifting their chins and curling their lips. It was a power that made them swagger, made them glower, made them sneer and glare and made them tower. It was a tower power, a glower tower power, and they were filled with it. First they slowed down, and this guy, whoever he was, pretended he didn't notice and just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Then all of a sudden, there was one of them in front of him, and another behind, and another to the side, and his back was brushing the wall, and he was feeling very closed in, very pinned, very trapped. The cops uttered a few words, each of them having a go, forcing this guy, whoever he was, to keep turning so he could answer, so he could look them in the eyes and smile and be cool and demonstrate that he'd got nothing to hide. He showed them some identification, and one of the cops snatched the wallet from his hand, started poking through it. And this guy, he nodded and smiled, because that's fine. That's perfectly fine. The officer was perfectly entitled to do that, even though he wasn't. Not in the slightest. Not even a little. The cop with the wallet, he put that wallet away while his buddies laid hands on this guy, the scared guy who just wanted to get home. They put hands on him and turned him and smacked the wall with his chest and held him there as they twisted his arms and put shackles on his wrists. One of the other cops, his name was Mandrake, like the magician, reached for his radio to call it in, to get someone over here to take this guy to jail. Temper Frey pulled the mask over his head, stepped from the doorway and walked quickly across the street. People saw him and looked away, turned away, hurried away. The cops didn't see him. Not until he'd swung that shock stick into the first cop's neck. Oh, how he went down. He jerked to the side and collapsed like a bag of broken sticks. The next cop, the one who'd taken the wallet, he went to throw some energy, and Temper broke his wrist with the lightest of light taps, and the wallet cop howled like a howler monkey and clutched his arm and bent his knees, but didn't move back for some reason. Maybe he wanted to get hit again. Temper obliged, and this time the shock stick was charged at full power, so the impact took the wallet cop off his feet. Mandrake, like the magician, he was moving in slow motion, drawing his gun and stepping back to give himself some distance. There was panic on his face, a rush to get things done, an urgency to his movements that was jumbling everything up. The gun got stuck in the holster and he fumbled with it, and Temper struck him across the jaw before he even got close to pulling it clear. Mandrake, like the magician, but really not, went twisting and falling, and when he hit the ground, the gun finally hopped free. Temper picked up the gun, stuck it in his waistband, pulled his shirt over it. "If I were you," Temper said to the scared guy as he uncuffed him, "I'd get out of Roarhaven for a while. Take whatever family you have with you." "But I didn't do anything," the scared guy protested, like that mattered. "Why did you do that? They'll think I had something to do with it. I'm in real trouble now." Temper placed a hand on this guy's chest, pushed him gently back against the wall. He could feel his thumping heart under his palm and waited for the guy to lock eyes with him. They weren't gonna take you somewhere and then release you. They weren't gonna realize their mistake because they didn't make a mistake. They're rounding up people who don't fit in anymore. So either get out of the city or find somewhere to hide. It isn't safe for people like you and me. Not here. Go on now." He took his hand away. The scared guy hesitated, then started hurrying off. "Hey," said Temper, and threw the guy's wallet to him. "You might need this." When Temper had left Roarhaven forever, with Kier of the Unveiled, he'd thought that forever would have lasted longer than 3 months. But here he was, walking down Decapitation Row and looking out for bad guys like he'd never even quit his job. Yeah, some things were different. He wasn't wearing a uniform, for one thing, and for another, the folk who were wearing it were the bad guys. Or maybe the bad guys had been wearing the uniform for a lot longer than he thought. During his time in the city guard, he'd known a hell of a lot of decent cops, and a hell of a lot of rotten ones. Now the rot had set in, and from what he'd heard, it had driven out most of the decent officers. In Temper's experience, this kind of rot didn't start in the basement. It started upstairs. It started at the top, and it worked its way down until the very foundations sagged with it. Skulduggery Pleasant had set up the city guard under Supreme Mage Sorrows, but Commander Hawk had brought in a wave of new officers when he'd taken over, and under Acting Supreme Mage Creed, the good guys didn't stand a chance. There was still one officer left, despite all that. There may have been more, but the only one Temper could be sure of was Corporal Aldo Ruckus, the dashing-looking guy nodding to him from the window of the cafe. Temper smiled at the lady behind the counter and asked for a coffee, then went and sat down. "You're looking well," Ruckus said. "Well rested, well fed. Retirement suits you." He had a funny way of speaking, did Ruckus. A proud son of Tennessee, he had that accent that dragged a little behind his words, so that nothing ever sounded even the tiniest bit urgent. But every single sentence, no matter how sincere, did manage to sound as if he was mocking you, straight to your face. Temper liked him, and not just because he was a fellow American. Ruckus was a straight shooter, and Temper could use one of those right about now. "You saying I put on weight?" Temper asked, settling into a chair that creaked slightly. "Just around the neck," said Ruckus. "And the gut." Temper smiled. "Bull! The only weight I've been putting on is muscle, you goddamn moonshiner. You have any idea what it's like living with a professional assassin? She's turned me into a vegetarian." "Damn," said Ruckus. "Apparently all the protein I need comes from the plants that are eaten by the animals I used to eat. It's a travesty, Aldo. I don't mind telling you." "It sounds it," said Ruckus. "But you can still eat steak, right?" "What?" "Vegetarians can still eat steak, can't they?" "No, Aldo, they can't. That's the complete opposite of what they can eat." "No steak? Ever? Or just on weekdays?" "Ever. No meat at all." "And what about chicken?" "Chicken's meat." "Yeah, but chickens have beaks. Vegetarians can eat things that have beaks." "How many vegetarians have you known?" "I used to date a vegetarian." "And did he eat chicken?" "Yeah,
Steak, too. And bacon. Can you eat bacon? No, Aldo, I can't. And I don't think your boyfriend was a vegetarian. He said he was. Always going on about it. Either a vegetarian or a Presbyterian. Can't remember which. So, no steak, no chicken, no bacon? Aldo, to stop you from just naming different kinds of meat, I'm going to repeat myself. No meat. None. None of it. Damn, Ruckus said again. Like I said, a travesty. The lady came over with the coffee. Temper thanked her, waited till she'd moved away before talking again. And how's work? He asked, speaking more quietly. Ruckus's expression soured. About what you'd expect. Lot of big talk at the lockers. Lot of big talk on the street. Lot of people getting their heads knocked. Must not be easy keeping your mouth shut. It ain't, Ruckus growled. I swear to you, Temper, this plan you mentioned had better be a good one, or I am walking out of there and never looking back. Well, it's a plan. I don't know how good it is, or how smart it is. Can't be too smart if you thought it up. You may have a point there. Temper sipped from his cup. It wasn't good coffee, but it'd do. He leaned forward. I'm recruiting. Ruckus looked at him. From the city guard? You're about the only one in uniform I can still trust, so no. But I got 2 people on board already, and I'm looking for a 3rd. And what are y'all gonna be doing? Ruckus asked. Temper paused. Interfering, he said. That's so. You're the one told me about the arrests, even before Creed made that speech of his. Random citizens being taken off the streets, fists knocking on doors late at night, boots coming up the stairs. You know how bad it's getting. I do. So I'm here to interfere with all that. Ruckus rubbed his chin. And what does your assassin think of this? Kier is occupied right now. The Unveiled are trying to figure out their place in the world now that their big sister has been taken off the board. I said I'd leave her with her family. She'll join me here when they're done. And does she know what you're fixing on doing? She does not. Because she'd know how dumb an idea it is? Temper shrugged again. And what do I get out of it? Temper grinned. I am glad you asked. You get incredible danger out of it, my friend. You get to sneak around in the dark and protect people who don't know yet that they need protecting. You get to go up against your fellow officers in the city guard, oftentimes violently. You get to escort good people to safety and risk all kinds of exposure as you do so. But you, Aldo Ruckus, you also receive a special bonus because you get to spy on the city guard. You get to pass me vital information about their plans and their actions, thereby putting yourself in all kinds of new and added danger at all times. I am a lucky one. Aren't you? And what do you hope to get out of this? What's the end game? Creed's building up to something. I don't know what it is yet, but it's something big. He started by taking people off the streets, all quiet-like. Now he's making it official. You think those 3 points of his are gonna stay at 3? He'll introduce more and more guidelines, more and more rules, and the faithful will be fine. It won't affect the faithful one iota. And when they see it happening to their neighbors, they'll be able to shake their heads and talk about troublemakers, talk about how these folk wouldn't be getting arrested if only they followed the rules. But the rules are the box that they're already living in. It's everyone else who has to worry. So things are gonna get worse, said Ruckus. Big surprise there. But you still haven't answered my question. What's all this for? We're gonna stop him, said Temper. Whatever his big plan is, we'll stop it. He's turning Roarhaven into an occupied territory, and I'm building a resistance movement. So, are you in? Ruckus's mouth shrugged ever so slightly, and Temper grinned. Chapter 10. Valkyrie and Skulduggery waited at the gates to Corrival Academy. Fletcher Wren emerged from the school's main doors, talking to a pretty girl with short dark hair. She grinned at whatever he was saying, then squeezed his hand and went back in while Fletcher came over. Nigeria, eh? He said as he approached. The sanctuary in Lagos, Skulduggery said. Do you know it? Of course, Fletcher replied, giving Valkyrie a hug. Haven't seen you in a while. We're not allowed to drop into the school unannounced anymore, Valkyrie told him. Duenna really doesn't like us. If it makes you feel any better. None of my fellow teachers are particularly fond of her, so... He shrugged. Valkyrie grinned. Who's the hottie? Fletcher rolled his eyes. Do not start. I'm not starting, I'm just asking who the hottie is. Her name's Grazia. She teaches science, and she's probably evil. Oh, she's not nice. No, she's lovely, Fletcher said. She's sweet and kind, and smart and funny, and, as you say, a hottie. But, purely going by my track record with girlfriends, she's probably an evil assassin or a goblin or someone who wants to remove my brain with an ice cream scoop. I'm not getting my hopes up for any long-term relationship bliss is what I'm trying to say. Valkyrie nodded. Probably wise. Excuse me, said Skulduggery. I hate to interrupt, but this conversation is boring me. Because it isn't about you, said Fletcher. That is indeed why it's boring. We'll talk later, Valkyrie promised him. You can tell me all about her. It's a date, Fletcher said. He put a hand on each of their arms, and they instantly traded their surroundings for the foyer of the Lagos sanctuary. Fletcher bade farewell with a quick arching of his eyebrows and disappeared. The administrator looked up from his desk. Welcome to the sanctuary, arbiters, he said. Purpose of visit. We're here to see Jericho Hargitsi, said Skulduggery. Mr. Hargitsi hasn't worked here for several years, the administrator responded. But he lives quite close by. Please give me a moment. He made a phone call, and Valkyrie stepped back to avoid a screaming man in shackles who was struggling in vain against the two women who were hauling him in. A young man passed, and Valkyrie frowned. Adedayo? He looked round and broke into a smile as he hurried over. Hi, he said. Hiya! Jesus, haven't seen you guys since... Anyway, how are you? We're good, Valkyrie said, giving him a hug. So you made your decision then? I did. You became a sorcerer. Oh, he said. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really a decision to make. You're not exactly going to talk a few gods out of ending the world and then go back to normal life, are you? And it's Balogan now, not Adedayo. Balogan Blue. Pleased to meet you, Balogan. Are you stationed here in Lagos full-time? Pretty much. Roarhaven's tempting and all, and I'd be beside my family and everyone I know, but Nigeria's where my folks grew up, and it's where my Iya Agba lived, so I figured I'd give it a try, like, absorb some of my heritage. He lowered his voice. And also, I really don't like Damocles Creed. Valkyrie nodded. I'm with you there. She glanced at Skulduggery. Are you going to say something? Like what? Skulduggery asked. Like how nice it is to see Balogan again after all this time? Maybe how it's nice to see him doing so well, living up to the potential you saw in him. Something constructive like that. Something not insulting, maybe? Not insulting, Skulduggery murmured, angling his head towards Balogan. He paused for a moment, then nodded. You're taller than you were. The administrator came over and handed Skulduggery a card, onto which was scribbled an address. Arbiters, Mr. Hargitsi is waiting to talk to you. Much obliged, Skulduggery said, tipping his hat. When the administrator left, he looked Balogan up and down. When we first met you, you were a confused and frightened young man with no idea what he wanted to do with his life. Now you at least look like you know where you're going. Thank you, said Balogan. That means a lot. Where were you going? Bathroom. Skulduggery put a hand on his shoulder, said, Never change, and walked off. Valkyrie gave Balogan another quick hug and caught up with him. They followed the map on Valkyrie's phone for close to 10 minutes and came to a nice little house on a nice little street. A smiling woman answered the door. My name's Onosa, she said, gesturing for them to enter. Onosa Tsira. Artwork covered the walls. Valkyrie didn't know the first thing about art, but she knew what looked cool, and this all looked cool. I'm quite excited. I don't know if you can tell, Onosa continued. I've never had an actual legend in my house before. Please, said Skulduggery, no special treatment is required. I was actually talking about Valkyrie, but I suppose it's an honour to have you here too. Valkyrie laughed, and Skulduggery pulled his left glove on tighter. Charming, he said. Onosa grinned and motioned to the door ahead of them. My husband's waiting for you in the next room. It might take him a moment or two to say hi, so don't take it personally. It's not you. He's rude to everyone. Thank you, said Valkyrie. I love your house. That's very nice of you to say, but it's not my house. I killed the owner and stuffed his body in the refrigerator. Which reminds me, can I offer either of you a refreshing drink while you're here? Valkyrie's smile hovered, as if it was wondering what it was doing on her face. I'm joking, said Onosa. Dear God, I'm joking. I would never do something like that. The refrigerator is far too small to hide a body. Anyway, Jericho awaits. Valkyrie hesitated, then followed Skulduggery into the living room. Polished floorboards, muted colours, nice furniture, a glass jar on the table, and nobody else there. She's funny, said Valkyrie. At least, I think she's funny. If she's joking, then she's funny and I really like her. If she's not joking, we'll probably have to arrest her and throw her in jail. But I still like her. You only like her because she called you a legend, Skulduggery replied. That's not the only reason, Valkyrie said. She also made you look silly, which is hilarious every time it happens. You are easily amused. Of course I am, she said. I hang around with you, don't I? Skulduggery folded his arms, and Valkyrie grinned. So, how long do we wait? She asked. I imagine we can stop waiting when Jericho walks in. It might seem strange if we wait any longer once that happens. It's just, she said he was here waiting for us, and he obviously isn't. So how long do we give it before you step out and ask what's keeping him? Why must I be the one to ask? Because I hate asking people things. You're a detective. Asking people things is part of your job. And it's the part I like the least. I'm not a pushy person, Skulduggery. I'm easygoing. I'm chill. He tilted his head. You are not easygoing. What? Yes, I am. I can't tell if you're being serious or not. But in case you are being serious, I'm being very serious. You're not an easygoing person. She stared at him. How can you say that? I am so laid back. He nodded. Okay. Don't say that. Don't just say okay and move on when it's blatantly obvious you don't mean it. You don't think I'm laid back. I think you're driven. I think you're a very driven person. I think there's an engine inside your mind that propels you forward at all times, exemplified by the fact that you can't sit still for long, and once you have a mission in front of you, you do not stop until it's been accomplished. Well, yeah, but I do all that in a really laid-back kind of way. You do not. Her stare turned to a glare. Oh, and I suppose you're the epitome of easygoing, are you? First of all, unlike you, I never claimed to be easygoing. And second, yes, actually, I am. We're getting away from the point. The point is, when are you going to ask Onosa where Jericho is? That's the point. You honestly don't think I'm laid back? I honestly don't. But there's nothing wrong with being driven. I happen to value that quality. Still, though, I always kind of saw myself as being really chilled out. Yes. You're not, though. Apparently. Be right back. I'm just going to ask where Jericho is. He stepped out of the room, and Valkyrie stood there and frowned. She took out her phone, called Militza. Hey, sweetie, she said. Quick question for you. Am I easygoing? Militza laughed. No, she said. I gotta go. Class is starting. Right, Valkyrie responded just before the call ended. She put the phone away and Skulduggery came back in. Well? Valkyrie asked. He's in the jar. I'm sorry? Jericho Hargitsi is in the glass jar on the table, according to Onosa. They looked at it. He doesn't appear to be, Valkyrie said slowly. It is quite a small jar, and pretty empty. It is on the empty side. Maybe it's a metaphor. Maybe the glass jar is a glass jar in his mind or something. Maybe, Skulduggery said, although she did say it was on the table. Then I'm confused. Is he a tiny, invisible man? What does he look like? I don't know, actually. I've never met him. It's just common knowledge that Jericho Hargitsi is the sorcerer to talk to if you have questions about peculiar psychic abilities. Valkyrie chewed her lip. You know what this might be? One of those Wizard of Oz type jobs where you're sent off in search of something, only to discover that it's been within yourself the whole time. Like the lion found his courage, the Tin Man found his... I know what they all found. Right. Sorry. Anyway, maybe if you're looking for answers, you come here, you're told Jericho is in the glass jar, but the glass jar is small and empty and, like, you suddenly have an epiphany that gives you the answers you're searching for. And have you had an epiphany? I had the epiphany about the Wizard of Oz. So now you think you had the wrong epiphany. I must have, yeah. Maybe if I go out and come back in, it'll reset. Yes, Skulduggery said. That's exactly how epiphanies work. Well, I don't have any other ideas, do you? You could try scanning the jar. You want me to read its mind? We're dealing with a sensitive, are we not? It would seem a logical place to start. Valkyrie sighed, reached out with her thoughts, and met someone. Her thoughts instantly retracted into her head. She blinked, activating her aura vision. A wonderful orange light swirled inside the jar. There's somebody in there, she said softly. The light drifted up through the neck of the jar and expanded outwards, forming a vaguely humanoid shape that hovered in the air over the table. Jericho Hargitsi, I presume, she asked. The shape floated there, and something buzzed at Valkyrie's mind. She resisted at first,
but then she softened and let it in, and when the buzzing hit the parts of her mind that formed words, she heard his voice. "Hello, Valkyrie," Jericho said. She smiled. "I'm not sure what's happening." The shape shrugged. "We're just talking. That's why you came here, yes? To talk, to ask your questions." "Yes, I did," she answered. "Sorry, this is a bit weird." "How do you think I feel? I live in a jar." "I knew someone else who lived in a jar for a bit." "Yes," said Jericho. "Let's see. A decaying man, was it not?" "Scapegrace," she said. "Are you reading my mind?" "I see vague images, nothing more. It's a side effect of our communication. I'm afraid I have no control over it. May I continue?" "I suppose," she said. "Just don't pry too far." "If I tried, you would know, and you'd block me. Can you say hello to Skulduggery for me? I've always wanted to see him in the flesh, so to speak. He does not disappoint." Valkyrie looked over at Skulduggery. "Jericho says hi." Skulduggery tipped his hat towards the jar. "Very pleased to meet you." The skeleton detective. It's a thrill to see him, it really is. "Now then, Valkyrie, what has brought you all the way to Nigeria?" "I'm new to all this sensitive stuff, and I really need some advice." "But you have access to the best sensitives in the High Sanctuary." "And I don't exactly trust them." "Ah," said Jericho. "Very well. Tell me what you need." 15 months ago, I had a kind of vision where I spoke to my sister in the future. I want to reopen that channel." "I see," said Jericho. "That does sound complicated. Would you mind if I peeked inside your head, Valkyrie? I will focus in on the relevant details, and you can keep track of me the entire time. But this is really something that I need as much information about as possible. You can push me out at any time." "Sure," Valkyrie said slowly. "But tread carefully. I have things just the way I like them, and I don't need you kicking over the furniture." Jericho smiled. "You have my word." When Jericho had finished collecting what he needed to collect, Valkyrie and Skulduggery stepped into the kitchen while he spoke to his wife. Not too long later, Onosa joined them. "Forgive us," she said, "but Jericho gets tired easily. It takes a lot of energy just to be him, so right now he's resting. But we've discussed your situation, and while reopening this psychic link may be too difficult for you right now, we believe it may be possible for you to send your consciousness 6 years into the future to talk with your sister." Valkyrie blinked. "You think I can time travel?" Onosa smiled. "With your consciousness, yes, not with your physical form. Have you ever tried astral projection, Valkyrie?" "That's when you leave your body, right?" "No, never tried it." "For someone of your power, this should come to you naturally, with just the lightest of prodding. Once you are in your astral form, once you leave the physical world behind you, time will fall away, and you should be able to converse with your sister." That's brilliant," Valkyrie said, and grinned at Skulduggery. "You hear that? I'm going to time travel. Have you ever time travelled?" "I have not," said Skulduggery. Her grin grew wider. "I'm going to do something you haven't done. Ha!" "The training and preparation for this could take a few days," Onosa said. "So Jericho and I will be accompanying you back to Roarhaven. We've never been, and we've heard wonderful things." "Maybe right now isn't the best time to visit," Valkyrie said slowly. "There's a lot of tension, and Damocles Creed is running the show." "Oh, we know Damocles from way back," Onosa said, waving her hand. "You do?" "Yes, indeed, Valkyrie. We're old friends. Practically. Almost. We tried to kill him once, but I'm sure he's forgotten about that. It was ages ago."
"Why did you try to kill him?"
Skulduggery asked. "Because we knew him."
"A good enough reason as any."
Onosa beamed. "You'll be needing us, I think. I see trouble ahead for both of you, and I think we can help."
"What kind of trouble?"
"Things aren't too clear at the moment, I'm afraid. I see vague images of violence."
"Sounds about right," Valkyrie murmured.
"And don't worry," Onosa said. "You won't have to chaperone us. We know quite a few people in Roarhaven, and I've already told them we're coming. Are you catching a teleporter back? Maybe we can hitch a ride. I've never teleported anywhere before."
"It's not easy on the stomach," Valkyrie warned.
Onosa laughed. "I think I'll be fine."
Valkyrie gave Fletcher a call, and Onosa packed a few things while they were waiting. When Fletcher arrived, Onosa slung the bag over one shoulder, picked up the glass jar, and beamed.
"I'm ready," she said.
They linked hands. Valkyrie blinked, and they were back in Roarhaven.
"Oh dear,"
said Onosa, her eyes bulging. She brought the glass jar to her mouth and threw up into it. Valkyrie stared. When Onosa stopped puking, she froze.
"My love," she said to the jar, "I am very, very sorry."
"We'll leave you to it," Skulduggery said. Chapter 11. It was all over the school. Bella Longshanks had been expelled for sneaking out of her room the previous night. Rumours immediately began to circulate. She'd sneaked out to meet a boy, to meet a girl, to vandalise the Devastation Day memorial, even though it plainly hadn't been vandalised, or, and this was Omen's favourite, she was part of the resistance group that had sprung up over the last few days to fight back against the High Sanctuary's new rules and guidelines. Try as he might, Omen just couldn't picture the quiet, well-behaved girl in his science class as a trouble-making resistance fighter. It was a Sunday, which meant every student over 14 could leave the school unaccompanied. He found Axelia on the bench beside the Black Lake. "Hey," he said, approaching slowly, the way you would approach an injured animal. "I heard about Bella." Axelia was sitting forward, elbows on her knees. She shook her head without looking up.
"It's ridiculous, Omen. They can't even say why they're expelling her. Yes, she was out of her room after lights out, but there were 3 others with her, and they're not getting expelled. It makes no sense."
Omen hesitated, then sat.
"How's she doing?" "She's in tears. She's gutted. It's so unfair, and there's nothing she can do about it. Her parents are coming in from Papua New Guinea to try and sort it out, but the secretary told them Duenna is too busy to meet anyone right now. You know the worst thing? There's no one else they can go to. Duenna's only boss is like the supreme mage, and he's not going to bother with something like this. There's nothing anyone can do."
She looked up.
"Unless maybe you ask your parents to say something?"
"My parents?"
"Duenna listens to them, doesn't she?"
Omen winced.
"She did, until Augur fulfilled the prophecy. Now they're just like anyone else. But you could ask them to try."
It wouldn't do any good. He knew it wouldn't, and his parents knew it wouldn't, and the very act of asking them would highlight their very obvious and sudden irrelevance, which would not lead to warm hugs and fuzzy feelings.
"I'll ask them,"
he said reluctantly.
"Thank you,"
Axelia responded, a smile appearing for the first time. "It won't do any good," he said immediately, before hope had a chance to sink its hooks in.
"Duenna won't listen even if I can convince my parents to talk to her, which I probably won't be able to do. But there's a chance, isn't there?"
"Not a big one, but
I suppose." "Thank you, Omen," Axelia said. "Thank you."
He was seriously regretting seeking her out today.
He got back to school and went to his dorm room and stared at the homework he wasn't doing. He and Augur already had permission to leave the grounds the following evening in order to go to dinner with their parents. He could ask them about Bella Longshanks then. Maybe they'd be in a good mood. Maybe they'd agree to it. He knew they wouldn't. But he was nothing if not optimistic, even when it came to Emmeline and Craddock Darkly. There was always the possibility that they might completely astonish him one of these days. Someone knocked on his door. He told them to come in, and when the door opened, he stifled his groan and managed a smile. "Hey, Tiago." Small, blonde-haired, and kind of annoying, Tiago stepped in. "Hi, Omen," he said, his voice cracking even with those two words. Puberty was not being kind to Tiago. "Listen, I was talking to Augur earlier. You know, about the thing." Omen's smile faded. "I told you not to do that. I just wanted to know how it was going." "Yeah," said Omen, "but I told you not to do that. You promised me." Tiago nodded, not even paying attention. "So I asked him how it's going, and I don't think he knew what I was talking about. He was looking at me like he didn't even understand what language I was speaking." "What did you say?" "I just asked him again, and he—" "No," said Omen. "What did you say when you asked him? What did you ask?" Tiago frowned. Okay, I went up to him and I said, 'Can I talk to you for a second?' And I don't think he even heard me the first few times. He looked spaced, like. Then I asked what was happening with my uncle." "And what did he say?" "He just looked at me, and then I started thinking maybe Omen didn't tell him it was my uncle who was, you know. So I explained that it was me." "What exactly did you say, Tiago?" "I said I'd gone to you to ask him if he could help, because my uncle's dangerous and saying that he wants to wake someone called the Witch Mother, and that the only way to wake her is through human sacrifice. Then I told Augur that the rest of my family are pretending like it's not even happening, and they don't seem to care that my uncle's about to, kill someone for no reason." "And what did Augur say to that?" "He looked at me for a while, and then he nodded and mumbled something and walked off." "Is he feeling okay?" "He doesn't seem quite together lately." "Augur's fine," Omen assured him. "He's just got a lot going on right now. But the biggest thing on his agenda is finding your uncle and stopping him before he does something stupid." "Are you sure your brother's up to it?" "Are you seriously asking that? This is Augur Darkly we're talking about, the chosen one. Tiago, you wanted a hero to take care of this problem for you, because this is precisely one of those weird little things you hear about that grows and grows until it's something that Skulduggery Pleasant and Valkyrie Cain have to swoop in and deal with at the last second in order to save the world." Tiago swallowed. "I don't want Skulduggery Pleasant and Valkyrie Cain dealing with this." "I know you don't. They always kill the people they go up against." "Not always, but often enough to be a worry, sure." "I don't want my uncle killed." "Which is why you needed Augur. And he's not going to kill my uncle, right? I mean, he killed that King of the Darklands guy." "That was a one-off," said Omen. "He didn't have a choice. Apart from that one time, Augur doesn't kill. Your uncle will be fine. In fact, from what I've heard, Augur might even be dealing with it tonight." "Really?" "That's what I've heard." Tiago considered this. Maybe that's why he seemed so spaced earlier. He was probably getting in the zone. "That sounds about right, yep. But, Tiago, you've got to remember what we discussed, okay? You don't talk to him about this, at all. You don't ask how it's going, and when it's over, you don't even say thank you." "Why doesn't he want me to say thank you?" "He doesn't want a fuss made. He doesn't want anyone to know he's still doing stuff like this. But he's the chosen one." "He was the chosen one," Omen corrected. "Now he's just Augur Darkly." "That's so weird. If I was doing things like this, saving people, saving the world, I think I'd want people to know about it." Omen shrugged. "He's just shy, I suppose." "Tiago, I have to finish my homework." "Okay," Tiago said, stepping back.
Tell him good luck from me, would you? And tell him thank you."
"You got it," Omen said, and Tiago left. Omen sighed and closed the textbook on his desk and lay down. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, but he needed his rest. He had a busy night ahead of him. At 2 a.m., with his roommates asleep in their beds, Omen sneaked through the school. If a member of staff caught him, he wondered which kind of punishment he'd be given. Expulsion, like Bella, or detention, like Bella's friends. He climbed 3 sets of stairs in complete silence and reached the covered corridor that linked the 4 towers, at which point every footstep became a painful squeak. Scowling, he leaned against the railing to take off his new trainers, enjoying the warm night breeze on his face. The towers stood tall and dark against the sky. He peered over the edge, down into the courtyard. Back in first year, before he'd made any friends, Never had tried to convince him that it was safe to dive off the balcony into the large circular fountain at the courtyard's centre. She'd insisted that it was, in fact, a rite of passage for co-rival students. He'd been so convincing that Omen had actually started to believe her, but Never had ruined it all by laughing. Declaring that Omen needed someone to protect him from himself at all times, Never had decided then and there that they should become friends with immediate effect. Omen hadn't argued. He hurried on in stockinged feet and found Crepuscular Vise by the North Tower. Crepuscular was wearing a dark green suit, combining it with a matching hat and a shirt that swirled with dark colours. His bow tie was spotted, and he looked paler than usual. His cheeks were sunken, his bulging eyes tired, and his lipless mouth grinned without mirth. He had been working hard, it seemed.
"Found him," Crepuscular said. "Remington Ventures got his human sacrifice, and he's all set to kill her. What do you say, Omen? I've got a teleporter on standby, and a mortal that needs saving. Wanna go be a hero?"
"No," Omen said immediately, then sighed. "But who else is going to do it?" Chapter 12. Human sacrifice, as a concept, brought to Omen's mind images of dungeons and manacles and cursed daggers clutched in the hands of robed fanatics. It did not bring to mind great tower cranes reaching over the roofs of New York skyscrapers and a control box clutched in the hand of a sweaty man with a droopy moustache. The human to be sacrificed, in this instance, was a pretty blonde American girl, maybe around 21, wearing a shimmering dress and dangling from the crane by her wrists.
"You let me down," she shouted. "You let me down right now, and I don't mean drop me onto the street. I mean move me over to the roof and let me down gently without injuring me, you little creep."
The man with the droopy moustache shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said, tears running down his face. "I'm so sorry." Omen and Crepuscular moved through the shadows behind him, their footsteps snatched away by the wind.
"You know,"
the blonde continued,
"when I walked into that bar, I looked at you and I thought, Gretchen, don't do it. He looks like a weirdo. But I ignored that voice, Remington. I ignored it, and I gave you a chance. And this is what happens. This!"
"I don't want to kill you," Remington wailed.
"But I have to. You are the worst first date ever," she yelled. "Definitely in the top 3.
"Your sacrifice will be worth it, I promise you. The world will be a better place. You must believe me."
"Next time," she called, "I'm swiping left. Left!"
Remington sobbed and held up the control box and raised his other hand to press the big red button. Omen stepped out quickly. "Stop!" he shouted. Remington screeched and whirled. "Don't come any closer!" Omen held up both hands. "Remington. You're Remington Venture, right? Tiago's uncle. How do you know Tiago?" "I go to school with him. He asked me to check on you." "He asked you to spy on me, you mean?" "He's worried about you." "He hates me!" Remington shrieked. "They all do." His voice dropped suddenly, barely audible with all that wind. "But I'm doing this for them. I'm doing this for everyone. We're all in danger. We're all in terrible, terrible danger. I've seen it. I had a vision." Omen licked his lips. "What did you see, Remington?" "The Faceless Ones. They're coming back. We have weeks, 6 at the most. I saw them." "If you had a vision of impending disaster, you're obliged to alert your local sanctuary." "Of course I alerted the sanctuary!" Remington yelled, waving the control box around. "I work there. The first person I told was my boss. I filled in all the paperwork. I did everything the way it should be done, but they ignored it. They told me to take a break. Said I was working too hard. Said I hadn't seen what I'd seen." "And have you been working too hard?" "That's beside the point. The point is the Faceless Ones are coming back, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." "So why do you want to kill Gretchen?" "Because he's a jerk!" Gretchen shouted. Remington shook his head. "I don't want to kill her. You think I wanted to tie her up and terrify her? You think I'm going to enjoy dropping her 73 floors onto a sigil I painted with my own blood? Do you know how long it took me to collect that blood? The effort that went into stopping it from congealing? I don't want any of this, but I have to do it because this will wake the Witch Mother. We'll need her, you see. When the Faceless Ones return, we'll need people like the Witch Mother." Omen shrugged. "I don't think I've ever heard of her." Remington laughed. "Of course you haven't. You go to that ridiculous school with my nephew. You really think you're going to find the truth in that place?" "So who is she?" "How am I supposed to know?" Remington screeched. "If you don't know and you go to a school where they teach a class on magic history, then what chance do I have?" "But if you don't know who she is, why do you want to kill Gretchen in order to bring her back?" "Because I saw it," Remington said, "in a dream."
"Well, that's convinced me,"
said Crepuscular, stepping out beside him. Remington yelled and jumped back, holding the control box between them like a gun.
Hold on, Crepuscular said. "Don't do anything rash. You painted a sigil with your own blood on the ground, did you? So the girl would have to land directly on it. You sure your aim is that good?"
"I've taken it all into account," Remington said. "Wind speed, direction, her weight."
"He kept asking me how heavy I was at the bar," Gretchen shouted. "That should have been my first clue, but it's so hard to find a single guy in New York who doesn't have a weird hang-up."
She dangled in silence for a moment, then shrieked,
"Guess I should keep looking!"
Remington glanced back at her and sobbed. "You hate me, don't you?"
"Yes!"
"Your sacrifice will not be in vain," Remington cried, and went to press the button. Omen flicked his hand, using the air to pluck the control box from Remington's grip. He dived, catching it as it fell, and heard a smack, and Remington went down. Crepuscular strolled over to the main controls and brought Gretchen closer to the roof. Omen hurried over, helped her down, untied her hands, and she flung her arms round his neck.
"Thank you," she said. "You saved my life. Thank you."
"Oh," he said, his voice muffled by her hair. "It's okay." She gave him a huge kiss on the cheek before stepping back, and he felt the blood rushing to his face.
"You should have let me sacrifice her," Remington muttered. "She'd die, but the world would live." "She has a name," Gretchen said, "and I am nobody's sacrifice."
She lashed a kick into Remington's side.
"You tried to kill me. Me! I have a life, you little insect. I have family and friends, and you killing me would have put them through hell. She kicked him again. I have dreams. I got one more year left of art college, and then I'm going straight to Hollywood. I'm going to get hired by the top animation studio on my list, and I'm going to spend the rest of my happy life making cartoons. And you wanted to take all that away from me. You wanted to rob me of that.
Remington got to his knees and started to speak, so Gretchen punched him right across the jaw, and he flopped backwards. She hissed, shaking her hand furiously.
Ow! That's my drawing hand.
You're in art college? Omen asked.
Gretchen nodded. Studying animation. Why, you interested in art?
I think so. I mean, yes. I'd like to study it, I think, after school, like. I want to draw comics.
That's cool, said Gretchen. It's a tough field, but it's like anything. If you put in the work, you have as much of a chance as anyone. You been working on your portfolio?
Not really. I've been too busy, you know.
Saving damsels in distress? Gretchen said, grinning. By the way, that was magic, right? What you guys were doing?
Yeah, said Omen, drawing out the word. And it's probably best if you don't tell anyone about it.
And what happens if I do?
Honestly? Not a whole lot. I don't think they'd believe you, for one thing. But it isn't like we'd send the cleavers after you or anything.
Cleavers are scary, I take it.
They scare me. I'm Omen, by the way.
Hi, Omen, Gretchen said. This is a lot to take in.
I'd imagine. She nudged Remington with her foot. Hard.
What happens to Laughing Boy here?
He'll be going to prison.
Will I have to testify?
Omen shook his head. We don't really need trials when we have people who can read minds.
That's handy, said Gretchen. I'm taking this quite well, I think.
You might be in shock.
It's a possibility, Omen. I'm not going to lie to you.
Crepuscular came over.
We have to get going,
he said, hunkering down to shackle Remington's wrists.
So you're just gonna go? Gretchen asked. That's it?
I'm afraid so,
Crepuscular said. You should probably talk to someone, Omen suggested. It'd be cool if you didn't tell them about the magic, but you should probably find someone to talk to about what happened. I mean, you were attacked and kidnapped, and Remington did try to murder you.
Yeah, said Gretchen. Okay. Hey, you have a phone?
Said Omen. Yes? She held out her hand and he passed it over.
I'm just putting in my number, she said. If you need any help with your portfolio and stuff, just let me know. Cool?
She tossed the phone back to him. Cool, he said. Thanks. Crepuscular waved his hand, and his teleporter friend wandered out of the shadows. Omen put his hand on one arm, and Crepuscular put his arm on the other, while keeping hold of Remington. Right before they teleported away, Gretchen gave Omen a smile. Chapter 13. Valkyrie thought about how best to phrase the delicate question she was burning to ask, and eventually decided on, Did she dump you? Temper Frey blinked at her. Wow! I figured it might be a touchy subject, so I thought I'd just plunge on in, she said. So, did she?
No! Kier didn't dump me. We're still together. She's just figuring some stuff out with her family, and I thought I'd come back here and do what I can to help.
Good, said Valkyrie. I like Kier. She's nice. She scares me, but she's nice.
She scares everyone, said Temper.
She doesn't scare me, Skulduggery said, joining them in the kitchen. Who are we talking about?
Kier,
said Valkyrie. Oh, he said. Well then, yes, she does scare me. The perimeter's secure. We can talk. It was an empty kitchen in an empty house in an empty part of the city. A few streets to the east were the mortal refugees from the Leibniz universe. A few streets to the west with the ruins that Darkess had left smouldering on Devastation Day. Here was the sweet spot. Empty, unspoiled houses where clandestine meetings could take place without any neighbours to inform on them. They sat, and Temper ran a finger through the thick layer of dust on the table. He wiped his hands. "Okay, you want to know about Creed's activations. I can help you with that. I had a friend. His name was Triton. This was like over 100 years ago, when I was one of Creed's favourites back in my church of the Faceless days. Triton was like me, a true believer. Neither of us started out that way, but there are tricks that people like Creed use to get you wrapped up in this stuff. Before we were sent out to recruit people to the Church of the Faceless, Creed'd take us through the talking points, what to say, how to respond when they replied. He had it all down. The most impressive part was that he'd give us a few things we'd be likely to hear in response to everything that we said, and in all the conversations I had with people, they always replied with some variation of those options. Creed knew how they'd respond, and he'd have a response to that response, all waiting to go. Human beings are so predictable. Did it work? Valkyrie asked.
Sorry?
Did you recruit many people?
Temper smiled.
No. I mean, I recruited a few, and Triton recruited maybe a half dozen. But these were only people who'd been considering joining us anyway. That wasn't the purpose of these conversion conversations. It never is. And it's not just the Church of the Faceless. It's literally any religion. The church is home. The people around you are family. They understand you. They love you, and you love them. So we were sent out, Triton and me, to convert others, armed with nothing but talking points and pamphlets. And we'd have to endure hellish conversations so awkward they curled my toes as I was sitting in someone's kitchen, or more likely, standing on their front step. But that's the point. Whenever we did this, whenever we had to endure the constant rejection and scorn and sheer annoyance, we'd feel a level of discomfort so profound that we started to see these people as different and separate from us, and we couldn't wait to get back to the church, back to our people. You get me? When we returned from the cold, cruel world out there to the love and warmth and understanding of our tribe. Everyone in the church knew what we'd been through because they'd been through it too. They'd been laughed at, spat at, cursed at. We'd all experienced the pain, but in the church, we were safe. He shrugged. The whole thing is meant to reinforce your bond to whatever religion you happen to be a part of. It's brainwashing. So by this point, when Triton and I were true believing fanatics, Creed had room upon room of kith. We'd seen the activation process churn them out again and again. Each person that was strapped into that chair believed with all their heart that they'd be the one, the special one, but they never were. Their minds were wiped and their faces melted off, and they were led off to stand in a dark room with all the others. It's amazing to think back on it and remember the certainty each time that we were about to witness the birth of the child of the Faceless Ones. I think it's because, after every unsuccessful attempt, Creed would tweak the process just a little, so that every attempt was seen as taking a big step closer to success. He took a breath and let it out. So, Creed announced to us all that this time he had it figured. This time he'd cracked it. That meant he was going to use one of us, one of his inner circle, those of us whom he knew had the kind of bloodline he was looking for. Valkyrie frowned. You were all descended from the Faceless Ones? Pretty much. Now we're talking very, very diluted streams here, faint, practically invisible. But sure, we all had the potential in our DNA for the activation to take hold. Creed hadn't been willing to risk us up until that point, but he'd ironed out the creases, he said.
so he picked Triton.
And Triton was delighted, Temper continued, thrilled to be a part of it. The idea that he might not be the child of the Faceless Ones? I don't think it even occurred to him. Or if it did, it didn't matter. Creed had convinced him, convinced us all, that to sacrifice yourself for his sacred mission was an honor beyond anything you could dream of. So Triton sat in this heavy old wooden chair Creed had built once upon a time, and I helped strap him in. Couldn't have him changing his mind at the last moment. No, sir. We strapped down his feet, his wrists, his chest. There was even a strap that went round his neck. I'll never forget the look on his face as we tightened the buckles. Pure happiness. While we were securing him, Creed came in to carve the sigils into the walls. What were the sigils? Valkyrie asked. The main one was a form of Ench. You know it? Ench is from one of the newer languages of magic, and by newer, I mean it only came into existence a few thousand years ago. The Ench sigil is designed to bring out someone's latent magic. It's a last-ditch attempt to provide a boost to a lagging young sorcerer right before the surge hits. It isn't used an awful lot because it rarely has the desired effect. But Creed took that sigil and adapted it to what he needed. Now the sigil, what he called the Ench Arak, actively seeks out your Faceless One's DNA and brings it to the surface. So you either end up as the child of the Faceless Ones, or, as has happened exactly 100% of the time, you end up as a kith. Back to the activation, Skulduggery prodded. Yeah, said Temper. So, anyway, once Triton was strapped in, Creed brought out the shard. A shard of what? Valkyrie asked. A crystal, a jewel, I don't know. Creed started out with 4, I think. 4 shards, barely more than slivers. Each one would be good for a few thousand activations before it shattered, but he'd used up 3 so far. The Ench Arak generates the transformative kind of power he needs, and this power is then focused through the shard and directed to the, well, in this case, to Triton. So there we were, and the Ench Arak sigil started glowing, and the energy went into the shard, and then it went into Triton, and he started glowing. There's a radiance that starts in their chests, and it just spreads. Every tendon in Triton's body stood out. It's like I could see every vein. His fingers were curled, his lips were pulled back, but his eyes were wide open. It only lasts a few seconds, but in those few seconds, I watched the expression turn from excitement to fear, and then to pain. But by that point, his eye sockets were closing over, and his nose was melting into his face, and his mouth was gone, and that was it. Another failed experiment. What happened to him? I brought him down to stand with all the others. He was my friend, you know. Least I could do. I just took him by the hand and walked him down. Everyone gave us such a wide berth. No one looked at him. No one even looked at me. It's like this blanket of shame came down over us all. For those few minutes, we were all honest with each other. We knew the activations would never work. We knew we were killing our friends, just like we knew that the next time Creed opened his mouth, he'd convince us all over again that this time would be different. And when did you start doubting him? Valkyrie asked. That very day, said Temper. A tiny doubt that I couldn't shake, that grew and spread and infected not only my belief in Creed, but also my faith in the Faceless Ones. We were doing all this for them, after all, and they couldn't protect us?
Did we really have to prove our devotion at such a tragic cost? He shrugged. So I ran. I joined the church when I was 8, and I left when I was 22.
And then you joined the army.
First I went back to New York, started living among mortals again. Then, when World War II broke out, I joined up. Went overseas to fight Hitler. Never managed to find him on the battlefield, but I faced some that were just as bad.
Creed couldn't have been overly happy with you.
Temper smiled. He was not. I think he would have had me quietly murdered if I didn't come from such a promising bloodline, if I didn't have the potential to be what he'd been looking for. The man's a stone-cold killer, but he doesn't see it that way. In his eyes, he's doing the work of the gods. He's their faithful servant, and everything, every crime or sin or travesty, is permissible in service to the Faceless Ones. Which is why he must be stopped, Skulduggery said, nodding. I'm doing my bit, said Temper. I'm the fly in Creed's ointment, the spanner in his works, the thorn in his side, the bump in his road, the twig in his eyeball, the spoon in his knife block, he faltered. You should have stopped a few idioms ago, Skulduggery said. That's what they tell me, Temper replied. But I never listen.
Chapter 14. You don't know much about astral projection, do you? Jericho asked. I don't, said Valkyrie. They were in Militza's house, waiting for Skulduggery to arrive so they could start the lesson. You can think of it like your soul leaving your body, Jericho said, but your body stays alive and awaits your return. Your soul, your life force, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, is you at your very essence. In your astral form, you can travel round the world in an instant. You can visit other planets, other universes. Not everyone can do it, and not everyone who can do it well. But you have a unique power inside you, Valkyrie. I could sense it long before I met you. How did you come by this power, if I may ask? I lost my true name, she said. I'm not sure I understand. Well, first I got my true name sealed. Dr. Nye did that. Do you know it? I'm aware of the doctor's existence. Nye opened me up, basically, and carved a sigil onto my heart, and did some other stuff that I don't understand. All while I was still conscious, by the way. Must have been painful. It was, although technically I was dead at the time. You know the death field that's in the necropolis? I was surrounded by something like that, except I was still walking and talking instead of, dropping dead. It meant that I could feel everything, but not scream about it. So my true name was sealed, but by that stage there was already a part of me that was breaking away from the rest of my personality, I suppose you'd say. That part eventually broke free completely and took my magic with it. So you were without any magic at all? Valkyrie nodded. Then a magic sucker exploded, and I absorbed that explosion, and it triggered my surge. And since then I've been flying and shooting lightning out of my fingertips, and I've got a psychic thing going on, and I've been able to latch on to other people's magic. When you say latch on, I look inside their minds, and it's like a series of doors that open up, and I can take what's inside. I absorb what they know, and I can do what they can do. It doesn't last long, but I've been able to absorb medical knowledge, and I've healed myself a few times. That sounds very handy. I might be able to do it with you, she said. If you're okay with it. It'd save us a lot of time. Jericho smiled. By all means, try. She reached out with her thoughts, and after nearly a minute, she frowned. I can't find anything. Because there's nothing to find, said Jericho. I don't have a physical brain for you to search through. 7 years ago, I moved into my astral form and I went travelling. But when I returned, my body was dead. An old friend of mine had killed me and blocked my return. I have been stuck like this ever since. An old friend killed you? Old friend, Jericho said, smiling. New enemy. Which is why I know so much about astral projection. I haven't really had any choice. Valkyrie chewed her lip. So I'm not going to be able to cheat here, am I? This is going to take ages. It will not take ages for 2 reasons, Jericho replied. Reason 1, I am an excellent teacher. And reason 2, I am sure you are an excellent student. The doorbell rang and Militza let Skulduggery in. I have arrived, he announced. You're late, Valkyrie said. I received word that Rancid Finds is still in Ireland and still trying to find someone to pay for his research into the Crystal of the Saints. I went to arrest him. Valkyrie's heart leaped. And did you? He wasn't there. Who is this Rancid Finds? Onosa asked. Is he an arch-enemy, a criminal mastermind? No, Valkyrie said sadly. He's just an idiot. Valkyrie lay on the bed with her eyes closed. Her breaths were even and deep. Her mind was calm. Skulduggery and Militza watched, and Onosa stood beside her, holding the jar that contained Jericho. All right, then, said Jericho. Tell me your intent. Tell me what you want to happen. It helps when you talk about your intentions out loud. It focuses the mind, like a spell. She nodded. I want to contact my sister Alice, in the future. You want to contact your sister Alice in the future, Jericho repeated. Good. You did it once before, didn't you? Yes. I saw her when she's 16. We spoke. She must have been thinking about you as you were thinking about her. 2 powerful sorcerers, 2 sisters, that would have formed a psychic link between you. I haven't been able to do it again, though. The link is already formed. You just have to tap into it. I can show you how to make the journey. And it will be a journey, Valkyrie. I'm going to show you how to astral project. Do you know what that is? It's when your spirit leaves your body. Indeed it is. You will be projecting your astral self along that psychic link with your sister. Cool. First, I will show you how to leave your body and travel into the next room. What is in the next room, Valkyrie? It's another bedroom. Describe it to me. The walls are blue. The bed has Okay, I don't remember what colour the duvet is, but there's a bed. There's a chest of drawers beside the window. I want you to picture it in your head. Can you see it? Yes. Now, reach into it with your mind. Expand your thoughts through the wall. Find a point in the picture in your head, a point in mid-air. Direct your thoughts towards this point. Valkyrie did exactly as he said. It was like she was falling asleep, while at the same time being wide awake, alert to every sound, every smell, every sensation. Now, allow yourself to be pulled to that point. Imagine there's a rope tied round your waist, and now it's tightening. It's going taut. It's tugging on you. She could feel it. Feel the rope digging into her hips. And now you're being pulled off the bed. You're weightless. You're like a balloon, and you're being pulled smoothly along. Valkyrie opened her eyes, except she didn't open her eyes. Her eyes remained closed, but she could see everything. She was still lying on the bed, except she wasn't. She was floating towards the wall. She turned her head, watched Skulduggery, watched Jericho. "When you reach the wall," Jericho said, his voice deeper now, slower, "you will pass through it like it isn't even there." Her feet went first, disappearing from view. Valkyrie didn't mind. She wasn't scared. She was calm. The wall came to meet her, and she smiled as everything went dark for a moment. And then she was in the other room and drifting towards the point in mid-air that she'd envisioned. She reached it and stopped, tilting slightly. "Valkyrie," Jericho said softly, even though she could no longer see him. "I want you to look at the bed, Valkyrie. I want you to note the colour of the duvet. Once you've done that, release the rope. Let yourself return to your body." Valkyrie imagined the rope falling away, and now she was drifting back through the wall. She turned, watching her body lie there in the bedroom. It looked so peaceful. The face was completely slack. Such an odd feeling. She sank into her body. "I want you to open your eyes," Jericho said. "Open your eyes now, Valkyrie. That's it." She opened her eyes, blinked. She felt exhausted and refreshed all at the same time. Skulduggery loomed over her. "What colour is the duvet?" "Blue and white," Valkyrie said. "It's blue and white." Chapter 15. Funny how many rooftops Temper had lurked on over the years. It seemed to be a thing, crouching above the streets, waiting to spring into action. He knew loads of people who regularly did it. He was here with 3 of them, for God's sake. But in all that time, with all that crouching, with all that waiting, he had come to one simple, inescapable conclusion. Rooftops weren't all that interesting. There were exceptions, of course. He'd lurked on a few rooftops in New York that had stone gargoyles to ward off both evil spirits and menacing rainwater. And in general, rooftops in Roarhaven were more imaginative than their regular counterparts. But no amount of gargoyles could stave off the boredom for more than a few minutes. Eventually, you had to face the inescapable fact that you were crouching on another rooftop, waiting for something to happen. "What's your view on rooftops?" he asked Ruckus, keeping his voice down. Ruckus narrowed his eyes, a sure sign he was giving the question some considerable thought. Finally he answered, "This is just a guess, but I'd say 4 miles." Temper nodded, didn't say anything, and keeping low, moved over to where Oberon Guile hunkered. Temper didn't know Oberon well, but Tanith Lowe vouched for him, and both Skulduggery and Valkyrie had worked with him in the past, so that was good enough for Temper. "Oberon," he said, "have you ever been on a really interesting roof?" Oberon looked at him. He was a good-looking man with some grey in his dark hair and permanent stubble. "What?" "I was thinking about rooftops," said Temper, "and it occurred to me that, by and large, they're pretty boring places to be. I'm just wondering if you have a dissenting opinion." Oberon kept looking at him. "This is what you think about." "I mean, yeah." "These are the thoughts that occupy your mind. You're the leader of this little resistance group of ours, and this is what you spend your time pondering?" "I don't just think about rooftops," Temper said, a little defensively. "I don't want you thinking about rooftops at all," said Oberon. "I want you thinking about tactics and strategies and backup plans and escape routes. Serious things.
I think about serious things too. I'm beginning to wonder if I've made a huge mistake joining up. You haven't, Temper said immediately. You made the right decision. Furthermore, you're in good hands. I've got all the tactics and backup plans and escape routes worked out ahead of time. I've come at this from all angles, don't you fret. Gotta be honest with you, Temper. I'm fretting. Temper gave one of his most winning smiles. What are you doing? Oberon asked. You're just smiling at me. You realize you're not saying anything, right? You can trust me. You look demented. You can still trust me, though. That's my point. Oberon grunted, and Temper decided to quit while he was behind. Tanith Lowe beckoned to him, and he hurried over. She nodded at the street below. Grey van, she said. See it? Been parked there all evening. Looked empty. There's someone inside? Caught movement out of the corner of my eye, so yeah, I think so. The grey van sat there, still and quiet. It was too late for dog walkers, and too early for joggers, so the street was empty, and there were no lights on in any of the buildings. 3 doorways in particular were of interest, all leading to apartments that were due for unannounced visits, the kind that resulted in people being dragged away and not coming back. If the city guard were to kick down those doors, of course, they'd find empty apartments. Temper had organised for all the occupants to be moved earlier that day, but he had no intention of letting it get that far. A squad of 10 officers was due here at any moment, according to Ruckus, and upon their arrival, the Roarhaven resistance would be on hand to offer them a quick lesson in demotivation. They were going to kick their asses, basically, and send them running. Temper was pretty sure that'd get their message across to Supreme Mage Creed. Nervous? Tanith asked. Temper grinned. A little, he admitted. Not so much as for what we're about to do, but for what it'll mean. Ah, said Tanith. The message. The message, indeed. And exactly why do we have to send a message? Why can't we just keep skulking around in the shadows, helping people escape arrest? That's been working pretty well for us so far. Creed knows we're out here. He doesn't know it's us specifically, but he knows what we're doing. He'll make a speech over the next few days, denouncing us as criminals or terrorists, and he'll be able to shape the way the public see us. By announcing ourselves, we take that piece of power away from him. If you don't mind me saying, that's a lot of risk for low reward. Taking any weapon away from Damocles Creed is never a low reward. You have no idea how much damage that man can inflict with just words. Tanith tapped his arm. A man got out of the grey van, took a moment to stretch his spine and roll his shoulders, and then he spoke into his lapel. A moment later, a squad of 9 officers of the city guard teleported into the middle of the road. The plain-clothed officer joined them, and the officers broke up into 3 teams of 3, coordinated by an officer Temper recognised. There'd been rumours, back when Temper was still in the guard, that the only friends Ferente Radaman ever had were a bunch of hollow men he'd dress up in people clothes, but Temper never cared enough to find out how true that was. Still, he could believe it. Radaman was just too damn strict to be fun. Ruckus and Oberon came over as each of the city guard teams went to a different door. That's the teleporter, Temper whispered, pointing. The guy lugging around the extra pounds. Oberon, you take him out first. Oberon nodded. Ruckus, see the big guy? That's the team you're going after. Oberon, when you're done with the teleporter, you assist. Tanith, your group's on the right. I'm taking the middle lot. We go in, we teach the lesson we came here to teach, and we get out. Our only goal is to make them think twice about moving against innocent people. We all clear? Well, okay then. He put on his mask,
and the others followed suit.
Let's go be heroes.
Chapter 16. Tanith rang the bell at Grimwood House. A moment passed, and the door opened. "Hello, Saucepot," Valkyrie said, grinning. "Hello, Chicken Nugget," Tanith said, and they hugged. Valkyrie moved back, examining her. "Where'd you get the black eye?" "Some idiot yesterday," Tanith replied, sighing. "Took exception to something I said, or did, or kicked. I don't know. It was ages ago. He wouldn't have laid a finger on me, but I was wearing a stupid mask that wrecked my peripheral vision." "Mask, eh? That sounds fun." "It's not bad, I have to admit. We've got a little Robin Hood thing going on, except we don't steal from the rich and give to the poor. It's more like we clobber the uniformed and set the poor free." "A noble pursuit." "Ain't it just? And I can't help but notice that you're wearing your necronaut suit. Expecting trouble?" "Not exactly," said Valkyrie, beckoning her into the house. Tanith loved Grimwood House. She loved the books on the shelves and the paintings on the walls. She loved the statues on plinths and the weapons on display. All Gothic, all horror, all awesome. They passed what Tanith was pretty sure was a Frazetta original in a thick gilded frame on their way up the stairs. "I called you," Valkyrie said, "because I figured if I didn't, you would never forgive me. Skulduggery and Militza are here with Onosa Tsira and Jericho Hargitsi. They're pretty powerful